Good morning, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. Everything's good?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the March 9th Executive Committee meeting. We acknowledge that we are on traditional lands of the Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed by 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, and the original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. The City of Regina owes its strength and vibrancy to these lands and the diverse Indigenous people whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory, as well as settlers from around the world who have continued to become Regina as their home. Some members of the committee and city administration are attending the meeting today through a video conferencing. I'd like to remind you of the following. Please ensure your cameras and microphones are turned off. If a member of council committee wants to speak, use the raised hand function to place your hand in the queue. When speaking, remember to unmute your microphone, enable your video camera, and all notes will be conducted by a recorded vote. Delegates will be attending the meeting today in person through teleconferencing to address the committee on different items on the agenda. Reports will be considered by City Council this week, scheduled for March 16th. And the deadline for registration as a delegate of the City Council meeting is 1 p.m. on Thursday, March 10th. Oh, okay. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the agenda at the call of the chair? Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Just a note here that we've withdrawn the EX 22-27 Rogers Communications Cell Tower lease, 418 North Pasqua Street, and we added the item EX 22-32 communications from Jackie Smith with respect to EX 22-29, the Heritage Rehabilitation Program Review. I will call the question. Any opposed? Thank you. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the meeting held on February 23rd? Councillor Hawkins, thank you. Any errors or omissions? Okay, I see none. I will call the question. Any opposed? None? Carried. Okay, we'll now first deal with EX 22-29. I would like to call upon Delegate Donald Luxton, external consultant. He will have a PowerPoint presentation to present today. Please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you are representing, if any, where you're calling from. You'll have 10 minutes to address Executive Committee, after which you'll have the opportunity to respond to any questions that members may have. Mr. Luxton, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Go ahead. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
My name is Donald Luxton. I am the principal of Donald Luxton and Associates based in Vancouver, and that's where I'm speaking from today. We have a very short presentation about our project. With your indulgence, I'll just launch right in. It's a pleasure to be here to present the results of this project. It's a culmination of several years worth of work that we've been doing with the City Planning Department to review and make recommendations to increase the effectiveness of the city's Heritage Building Rehabilitation Program. And at this point, I'd really like to express our sincerest thanks to city staff for all their assistance and help in bringing these recommendations forward. Thank you to all planning staff at the city. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, what I'll cover today is the parameters of the project, how this is based on conservation best practices, the program review itself, and our recommendations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Part of this was to really look at the entire rehabilitation program to understand how to make it the most effective possible, to increase protection on heritage resources, to engage with the community and begin to understand how to make recommendations that would increase the effectiveness of the existing program. Next slide, please. It's based on best practice that we know from globally and locally and nationally. In Canada, this is the document that guides us in our heritage work. Next slide, please. There's a national framework, and we've also prepared in a previous project a thematic framework for the city of Regina that ties into this nationally recognized framework. Next slide, please. And this is a standard tool for understanding heritage value of individual sites. Next slide, please. We've now integrated our recommendations into a process, the three-part conservation decision-making process that is outlined in the standards and guidelines. And it's a very systematic approach to how to apply the standards and guidelines within municipal planning by understanding the resource, by planning for conservation and doing the actual intervention of the conservation work. Next slide, please. Of course, we also have to consider the enabling legislation, the Heritage Conservation Branch and the Heritage Property Act as part of how our recommendations are framed. Next slide, please. We also tie heritage conservation to many other civic objectives, and heritage conservation and sustainability are an extremely important partnership. Next slide, please. We're trying to support all of the pillars of sustainability. Next slide, please. And also we want to think about how these projects benefit us in more than just one way. And there's many benefits to successful heritage projects. Next slide, please. Not the least of which is the diversion of materials from landfill. We also see links between economic development and many other objectives at the civic level, making heritage conservation an incredibly important part of municipal business. Next slide, please. Program review, next slide, please. As part of this process, we've developed a new vision for the program with three goals: increasing heritage conservation efforts, supporting neighborhood character, and promoting greater public appreciation. Next slide, please. There was a thorough engagement process involving staff, council, Heritage Regina, etc. We've figured out what was working and what wasn't working, and began to develop recommendations to address those gaps in the program. Next slide, please. And we looked very closely at financial incentives as a key element that was available but maybe not calibrated correctly to achieve maximum effectiveness. Next slide, please. Our recommendations were based on, next slide would be fine, thank you. Are based on immediate and short-term, medium and long-range recommendations, so that we wanted to know what could be brought in easily and sooner and provide greater impact, what would take longer to bring forward, and some long-term goals. One of the key things we've asked for is for financial incentives. It was a real lack in the current program, and it's based on best practice in other municipalities across Canada. We wanted to expand the grant eligibility to capture, for example, homeowners, as well as the nonprofit sector, as well as other heritage projects. We wanted to see further information go out about the heritage properties, and we've established standards and maintenance bylaw. We have recommended that, a model for that to the city. Next slide, please. There's a number of things that we see working in the following year to 2 year range and ongoing. Working with Heritage Regina on public initiatives, aligning heritage planning policies with civic sustainability goals. We think there's a need to work with your building inspectors to establish code equivalencies. Code upgrading is such an important part of heritage rehabilitation, but is challenging if you don't have these alternatives. And we think there's a lot of opportunity as neighborhood planning is underway to develop lists and identify significant heritage properties. Next slide. In the long term, we've offered several models for how civic grants can be distributed, one of which could be an arm's length heritage foundation, which could distribute grants and also achieve other objectives. We think that as we move forward, there will be discussion in the neighborhoods about development incentives like infill, which are a very useful way to support heritage conservation. And we see potential in the future to look at reviewing a density bonus or transfer incentive as development conditions evolve. That's my last slide. I think the next one's just a title slide. I apologize for the briefness of the presentation, but I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to look now to see, do we have any questions from members for our delegate? How come my screen isn't on? Oh. Councillor Hawkins, you can go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Mr. Luxton, thank you for your report and your presentation, which I think are going to be very helpful to us. I have simply one question, and it's perhaps you may have alluded to it in the report, but if you could clarify, it would help me. Right now, when we look at a building, we look at the exterior of the building when we're considering giving it heritage status. What about the interior? Should we, under the new program, be inspecting both the interior and the exterior of buildings that have heritage status? How do we handle the interior of buildings is a question.
Through the chair, thank you for your question. We do consider interiors in exceptional cases. One of the things that we know from best practice in other municipalities is that it is a challenge to administer any interior legal protection, but it is sometimes very important. And I would, for example, point to a project I've been working on, Dark Hall, where the interior is really the heritage value of the building is embedded in its wonderful interior and is being fully restored. The question is that if there is heritage value in the interior, it should be identified. If interior features can be preserved and they are significant, then we have mechanisms to achieve that. But that usually we are most concerned about the exterior. We are looking at what the public sees and what is the community heritage value that is perceived by most people, which is the exterior of the building.
Thank you. One more, Madam Chair, if I might. How do we handle the problem of demolition by neglect?
It's a very, through the chair, it's a very difficult issue. And so part of what we have done in our recommendations is, and we've worked very closely with staff in this regard, to frame up recommendations regarding minimum maintenance bylaws so that buildings do not get to that point, and to make sure that maintenance is undertaken to keep buildings secure and preserved until they can be rehabilitated. Demolition by neglect has also kind of grown out of the existing system that got put in place in the 1980s, where there was protection but not enough incentives. So owners would just let a building start to deteriorate because they ultimately wanted to demolish because there was no advantage to keep their building. We're taking a different attitude in these recommendations, that we're going to help people achieve conservation and keep the buildings functioning and used and useful, as well as returning value to your tax system. So these are important considerations about the attitude of our recommendations that we're working to assist building owners, not work against them.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Briciani, can you please go ahead, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Luxton, for appearing today. I just have a question in regards to follow up with Councillor Hawkins. We've had a few, and I just want to know how this program will help us where we get a home that comes, it is designated heritage, and you get two different appraisals, one that's saying this building is falling down, the next one is saying it can be rehabilitated. How will this program help us prevent that? Like, is there going to be someone at arm's length that's going, like, how will that be determined? Because it does come down to a difference in opinion, and then we're caught in the middle. So if you can just help me understand that through the chair.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I think we've started to address that issue in our recommendations. So we have discussed with staff that there is a process involved that involves kind of a neutral and objective assessment that needs to be undertaken. And part of the problem is that when we look at these issues, we have to look at the fact that professionals are involved, that we have, for example, structural engineers, and we'll ask for often a structural assessment, and we can generally get a second opinion if we need one. So that's a process that just needs to be in place as we move forward. We're not going to remove all conflict. We're not ever going to have a perfect situation where every identified heritage building is preserved, and I put that caution up front. But what we need is a process that is more equitable in terms of making decisions, but also provides some financial incentives, which is often the leverage you need to make projects financially viable. And so that is a challenge with homeowners. For example, if their home is much smaller than something they could build if they demolish, then we often look for alternatives like infill, additions, etc., to find the ways to make projects viable. But the incentives that we've recommended are moving towards making owners whole, not punishing them for having a heritage building. And so ultimately over time, what we find in other programs in other municipalities is that the right owners come forward for the right buildings because they see the potential to use financial incentives to preserve heritage buildings, to understand how they can work with the city on an ongoing basis to achieve conservation. And so back to our goals of why would we do this, we feel that community heritage conservation is a benefit to the entire community. And so, which is the reason we've asked for the financial resources to help incent conservation. I will make one other quick comment, is that when financial incentives are offered, we find that there's a tremendous leverage value to the contribution. We often find people spend at least 10 times as much as they receive in financial incentives at the municipal level. And so we see a lot of activity coming out of this. And so this is beneficial to the community economically, it's beneficial from a conservation point of view, and it ultimately improves the tax base by rehabilitating vacant buildings.
Thank you. Through the chair, so how does this policy work with people who are not on the list that it is deemed that their property does have heritage? How would this program work to facilitate that?
So also part of this program, and this is something we've been working with the city on for a while, is a process for evaluating heritage significance. And so many of the sites that are currently listed on the holding bylaw or have been identified were identified many years ago. And so there needs to be further outreach into the neighborhoods. There needs to be a chance to identify sites that have not yet been recognized, because one of the things that has clearly changed since the 1980s is we recognize other heritage values. We recognize Indigenous heritage values. We look to different cultures and their heritage values and things that have occurred in the city that explain a much broader range of history. And so we will undoubtedly identify more heritage sites moving into the future. What we have set up in the recommendations is a process whereby a site that's not identified can be considered and evaluated, and also be eligible for conservation incentives moving forward. And we feel this is extremely important for the owners of potential heritage houses who may be looking for just some assistance and help with certain parts of their building that needs work. And we've seen this in many other municipalities where having a voluntary program is much more effective than trying to force people to be included.
So just on that, through the chair, is there anything that's going to, I guess, ensure that when people buy a home that there is some heritage designation, or does that just come, how does that flow? So if someone is buying a property and they're not aware, that does have, is that flagged somewhere through the Realtors Association, or is that part of at all of this policy through working with any other partners in the city through the chair?
Yes. So the general process is that anything that is identified or on the holding bylaw or has identified heritage value would be identified by the city. So you would in your due diligence you would find that. If a building is not yet identified, then we still have to recognize basic property rights, that you can't, you don't necessarily want to protect something against an owner's wishes unless there is a conflict situation. We are hoping that the message that will be sent out is that the program is open, that there are opportunities if you would like to participate and apply for incentives, that your building can be evaluated to see if it's eligible. And that is a much smoother, easier process. We've seen it happening, for example, in cities where financial incentives have been offered. For example, the city of Victoria since 1983 has, through the Victoria Heritage Foundation, has been offering grants, and they have now well over 300 designated heritage homes that have come into the program in exchange for some ongoing funding, which in 1983 was 50%, but has dropped over time as the need has grown, as there are more buildings involved. But the owners can come back more than once. So the great thing about those grants is you can, if you need to fix your porch, you can get a grant to fix your porch. If you need to fix some windows, you can get a grant 2 years later to fix some windows. So it's an ongoing support, not waiting for a catastrophic failure.
Okay. I guess when in reading through the report, I think I read that there could be an uptake, like once there's incentives for this, which is good. I mean, to protect our heritage, and I see that. But I'm wondering about in 5.5, the combination of incentives. The owners of eligible properties may apply for both tax exemptions and major grant if combined value, it says, is of the incentives does not exceed 50% of eligible conservation work costs. So yeah. Do you see, though, that if we have an uptake, would we not think that we would like to spread it out to a few more? Or what was the reason for putting that 5.5 and having it combined, that people can apply to both through the chair?
Through the chair, it's absolutely critical that these incentives be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And so in some cases, there will be a need to apply more than one type of incentive, and in others, there won't. So this is kind of a maximum eligibility. So the principle is that it's always cost shared. It's at least 50% cost shared, and generally the incentives might be less than that based on need. So in some projects, again, we're trying to undertake a whole bunch of work because the building really needs it. And complex commercial projects are going to fall into that category where there needs to be life safety and building code upgrades and structural upgrades. Then we will need to increase the amount of available incentive. For something, again, for a homeowner who needs their porches failing and needs to be structurally upgraded, that will be a much smaller potentially amount and contribution. So this will play out in the adjudication, which will need to be reviewed. And certainly the experience I've had in setting up grant programs and being involved in grant programs is that you will see a variety of projects come in. And what we're trying to do is anticipate the different categories of need. So one of the key things is that the existing incentives program, which is what we were trying to address, didn't necessarily achieve the needs of commercial building owners, institutional building owners, and homeowners in very specific ways. And so, for example, churches in Regina are a huge issue. You can't give them a tax credit. So we needed some financial reserve there to deal with some of you have a city of beautiful churches that many of which need work. And so that would be looked at again on a case-by-case basis and work with the owners of those properties to see what they will need. The other thing that we are trying to work into this program is the idea of surety, clarity, and fairness, but also predictability. That if the program starts and stops, then people cannot predict a program for their building that allows them to plan for maintenance, plan for restoration, plan for upgrade. And so these are the things that are really critical. I need a new roof in 2 years. Will your grant program be able to help me? So those are the things that we start to understand by communicating with the building and property owners and managers so that they can say what their needs are. And so it becomes really an open communication. The applications for the grants will come in, they will be adjudicated. If there's not enough money to cover them all, then there's not enough money. You wait for the next round. And so it's a predictable application process, predictable assistance, and it works much better that way for property owners.
Thank you. And my last question through the chair. So what is the recommendation cap on this per year, or is there one through the chair?
It's all in the council report of February 16th in terms of projected caps and amounts. So on the financial impacts are listed on page 2 of the council report. And there's a review of tax exemptions under the Heritage Incentives Policy. And our recommendation for the $250,000 per year for financial incentives is based on a rough guideline that we've used in all our municipal projects of $1 per citizen per year, which is about what we see in both very large cities and also much smaller cities as well. So it's a self-calibrating kind of amount that we start with. If the program is very successful, there is potential to increase it over time if you're seeing incredible results out of it. And the city of Edmonton is an example of that. They're at about $1.5 million a year for heritage incentives right now, but that is a program that's been building since 1992.
Okay, thank you very much for the information. It's very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Councillor Stanachek, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Through the chair, I have a question that kind of follows up on some of the questions from Councillor Bresciani, specifically regarding homes that are not yet on the heritage list. And I have heard from someone who has a home that probably would qualify as a heritage home, who feels that somehow there would be she'd have less control over her property if it was designated. I'm just wondering if you could tell me what kind of a response would you give to someone like that?
It's through the chair. It's a common feeling. The issue is of control. I hear from many people, oh, nobody will let me change a light bulb if I, and I really don't think anybody needs to fear that level of control. Most heritage programs, as mentioned, deal with the exterior of buildings and the appearance of the building to the public. Often we allow changes to heritage properties. And heritage conservation does not mean that you freeze a property in time and never let anything happen to it. Quite the opposite. It's the management of change on the building and how that change occurs. We have to change heritage buildings. We intervene in heritage buildings to make them safer, to make them more usable. And if you know the work that was done, for example, on the College Avenue building, there was a great deal of change that occurred to that building, including additions, interior changes, new services, etc. The way that change is managed is through the document I mentioned, the Standards and Guidelines for the Conservation of Historic Places in Canada. It gives us guidance for how change can occur, and it also defines the type of change. So the most common activity on heritage buildings is what we call rehabilitation. And it's change that allows continued function to occur while protecting heritage value. So in many houses, what we are concerned about is how they appear from the street, which means we can do lots of things on the back of the house. We may not have things on the inside that have heritage value. You can change whatever's on the inside. So essentially, we're talking about what might be visible to the street, which is generally considered to be the significance of the building. If there's anything else that can be identified, but in general, it's not meant to lock people into never changing anything. As a matter of fact, my conservation projects all involve change. And so often we add to the rear of a building. We put in an infill building. We add a laneway house. We do things that change the property, but we protect the main house. And that's the kind of critical part of this. And this is also very true for commercial projects where there may be a great lobby in the building, but everything else in the building is very utilitarian and can change many, many times. So we don't see it as a straitjacket, and these things can be explained to owners. And again, we're using a program that is voluntary and encouraging to people to participate, not forcing them. And I'll just briefly say that in the heritage planning, we call it the carrots and the sticks. The sticks that you beat people with are the regulations, the carrots are the incentives, and in my experience, in every situation, you get better results with carrots. And so that's what the recommendations are based on, is finding ways to encourage people to participate.
Okay, thank you. My last question is just regarding, and through the chair, is regarding the foundation, the proposal of a Regina Heritage Foundation. In your experience, where these exist in other provinces, other cities, do they do broader fundraising? Do they have other sources of funding other than just the municipal funding for it?
Through the chair, yes, and we've provided some information on the potential for this. And again, this is something that could evolve over time. And I've been involved in forming and sitting on a number of heritage foundations. I was a founding director of the Victoria Heritage Foundation in 1983. It started off as strictly a flow-through foundation where city money went to the foundation to give to heritage homeowners. But over time, based on its extreme effectiveness and great impact, their budget has increased. They also have an education wing that promotes publications and actually publishes their own neighborhood histories. It's very successful. The Vancouver Heritage Foundation, I was on the first citizen board in 1990. The foundation is an arm's length of the city of Vancouver that receives about $100,000 a year in city funding, but their total budget is about $400,000 a year because they are eligible for different grants from foundations, from BC gaming grants, etc. So they have also recently, in the last 2 years, are receiving $300,000 a year from the city for distribution to heritage homeowners. So it's a robust and ongoing financial picture, and we expect that these foundations can actually achieve many other things than just giving away money.
Okay, thank you. And thanks again for your report. It's really important and valuable for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanishuk. Councillor Sukiniak, please go ahead.
Thank you. I believe I just have one question. Also, thank you very much for all your work with this. It's a follow-up to one of Councillor Hawkins' questions. So my question is regarding the improvements, do they allow for additional internal inspections than we currently have? But for more context, I'm thinking of a situation where a homeowner allows the inside of their property to deteriorate, and we don't know about it because we don't inspect the inside because it doesn't have heritage value. So will that be handled by additional inspections or is the thought that with the carrots, the new incentives being proposed, that won't happen anymore through the chair?
Through the chair, this was an issue that we discussed and is ongoing in terms of implementation. What we're hoping is that the minimum maintenance bylaw model will help us understand that. If you're allowing a building to deteriorate, it's pretty obvious from outside. If you can see the roof collapsing, if you can see things happening, and certainly now we have the ability with drones to be able to inspect properties in a much more thorough way from above, which is really helpful. So it's not that we even physically need access in. We can tell when there's water ingress. We can tell when there's structural failure. But we hope it doesn't get to that point. The issue is that we've been seeing way too many examples where the deterioration has occurred to the point where the building can't really be salvaged. It's too late at that point. So we want to make sure there's early warning on deterioration, and that we have mechanisms to begin to offer help and intervene before it gets that bad. The biggest issues are security. So if the building is open to anybody walking into it, we generally find somebody will set a fire. If a roof is not being maintained, we know that there will be structural failure over time. So those are the things that we're going to be looking for moving forward. And so there's increased ability for the city to do that with the minimum maintenance bylaws.
Great. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson, please go ahead.
investment. Most of the report and what you've discussed talks about an expense, whether it's a grant, tax abatement and so on. I'm in support. There's social benefits, but presumably this also escalates the value of a property and subsequently increases tax revenue. I know the city actually had some documents about this in the past. Can you comment on how this unfolds in jurisdictions with more mature heritage policies like this? Is there a net revenue gain as a result of these investments?
So, through the chair, surprisingly, there is. And this is the experience of jurisdictions throughout North America. It's one of the reasons that we wish we had the preservation tax credits that the United States offers. But the reason that they've been in place since 1980 is that it takes unrehabilitated properties, which may be returning virtually nothing in taxation, and by offering a tax credit over time, in 10 years, you have a property that's fully rehabilitated and paying full tax. And so this is the trick, and the reason for the tax incentives is that they allow investment in a resource, but they also allow the resource to become economically viable. And so the reason that we have over time and through experience kind of landed on 10-year tax holidays is that allows a building to not only be completed, but also to catch its economic breath and move forward. At the end of the 10 years, you're collecting full taxation on a property that you were collecting no taxation. So the answer is yes, absolutely. There is ultimately a net economic benefit to everyone involved. In the city of Victoria, they've been tracking heritage homeowner grants for 40 years now. And there's, in general, a 29% increase above standard building stock for maintained heritage properties. And what that has done, if you have the ability to access those grants in Victoria, those houses are beautifully restored. They're in excellent condition. They sell for a premium in the market, and it makes those buildings self-sustaining in the long term, that people buy them because they are prestige properties. And that's where we want to end up in this situation. We want to end up with fully functioning, economically viable heritage buildings that are contributing to the economy and the community. So that's the intent of the leverage of these incentives.
Thank you. Second question through the chair is about the merger of old and new and these policies specific to sustainability. Where do you see an interest and a need to ensure energy sustainability and efficiency in these guidelines? So for instance, if someone has a designated heritage building, they want to install EV panels, solar heating, and energy efficient windows that might not align with the heritage of the building. Where do you see these two policies merging when it comes to heritage rehabilitation?
I see them as integral. Through the chair, I can give many examples, and I won't, I'll be as brief as possible. As a heritage practitioner on our projects, we embrace sustainability. There's no real conflict here, but one of the key things we need is a clear understanding of building code equivalencies so that we can find acceptable alternative solutions. And that's one of the reasons we would like to see some work with your city building inspectors to understand how to achieve alternate compliance. So there's many different ways to achieve upgrades to windows. We always leave buildings more energy efficient than when we start. We consider it to be, we work on sustainability initiatives in my office with pride. So we can find ways to increase energy efficiency. There's fantastic mechanical systems we can use. Windows can be upgraded sensitively. There are ways to do it, and there is allowance in the standards and guidelines for those kind of upgrades. In general, what we need is to provide good examples and models of how to do it, but we would not see sustainability versus heritage conservation. We would see them working together.
Perfect. Thank you. Last question. This one might be of interest to city staff who deal with waste management. You talked about the resource life cycle, reducing waste, and specifically waste that goes to the landfill. I understand countries like New Zealand and Australia introduced really robust building construction material recycling programs in the 80s and 90s. Can you comment further on how this saves in landfill costs by requiring recycling, by reducing the demolition of buildings? Anything you could add to that?
Oh, absolutely. Through the chair, I'll be brief because it's a very robust discussion that we have over these issues. Vancouver has a deconstruction policy now. It's actually economically viable to deconstruct buildings. So we're working more and more with companies that actually take buildings apart to salvage the materials, because the materials, as we know, are more and more valuable and scarce. So one of the key things is that as we don't talk so much about LEED performance or for heritage buildings, because it's not quite the same thing. You're saving the existing building. It's, if you look at the whole idea of recycling, the idea of recycling a pop can versus recycling an entire building is really, the scale of it is massive. So first of all, we're starting by not throwing away all the materials. Secondly, the materials in these buildings tend to be repairable or retrievable. Lumber. We have windows in buildings that are 150 years old that we've repaired and they're still functional. That's something you can't say about a vinyl window that lasts 20 years and you can't recycle it. So we're starting off, first of all, with what I consider a precious resource. And so we start with the attitude that we shouldn't throw away anything more than we need to. If something is repairable, we repair it. We know that the effect on our landfill sites of construction waste is tremendous. It is huge, and that stuff doesn't go away. So fortunately, the industry has stepped up. We now recycle drywall. We don't throw it in the landfill, etc. So these are all evolving initiatives, and I would encourage further thinking at the municipal level as to how to be less wasteful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Mayor Masters, please.
Thank you. Through the chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Luxton. My question is, you recommend removing the grading system, but that's not moving ahead at this point in time. Can you explain why you recommend moving the grading system that we currently use?
Through the chair, yes. It's a philosophical plus a practical point of view. So you will notice the Canadian Register of Historic Places, which is online at historicplaces.ca, is an ungraded register. The idea of graded versus graded registers grew up many years ago when in 1979 Parks Canada began to institute a policy of numerical assessment of buildings. And once you're scoring buildings numerically, it's pretty easy to say, well, 80 is a cutoff or 90 is the best or some kind of arbitrary thing, without recognizing the fact that heritage value is really not measurable in that way. So as we've moved towards values-based assessment, as opposed to those numerical or quantified assessments, we understand that buildings have different levels of heritage value, and we try and understand that by writing statements of significance and doing assessments on the building that are more robust and not fixed as well. So there's also a question of cultural value on these sites. A property might be, for example, in Regina, might be very important to the German community, the Chinese community, and their history. That might be an important indigenous site. And we don't feel we can capture that by saying it's an A or a B or a 1 or a 2. And we would like to ultimately move towards an ungraded system because, again, the clues are embedded in the standards and guidelines. It doesn't tell you how you can not apply standards and guidelines properly. So whether it's a number 1 or a number 2, it doesn't matter. The standards and guidelines still apply, and we should, if we're going to conserve a property, we should conserve it. So it's the graded registers really grew out of the 1970s, and an understanding that administratively it's easier if you know something is a first-class resource, you're going to fight harder for it. And the non-graded register is a little more robust to manipulate and use to determine heritage value. But ultimately, we don't want to leave buildings behind, because if you have 2 categories, the second category inevitably becomes expendable.
Thank you very much for that. I too grew out of the 70s, and probably administratively difficult. One final question. What was considered that's been left out of the report? Other than currently right now, I understand the grading system's in a review, but was there anything else that was considered but left out of the report?
Through the chair, I would say that we considered many different things, but we didn't leave it out if we felt it would be effective. What we did was our approach in working with municipalities is always to make our recommendations for what we feel will work. We've also had to deal with, as usual, and again, staff have been so helpful in working through many opportunities and discussions, which is why we present the recommendations we've landed on. So we didn't leave anything out, but there's always more you can do. We felt what our recommendations were appropriate and achievable, and also fit the financial situation while aiming for maximum effectiveness. I guess I would round up with the statement that our approach to municipal heritage planning programs is start small and grow. Don't get too big and fail. And so we see always the need for assessment over time, for monitoring as to what initiatives are most effective, and if necessary, adding more incentives as you go. We also feel there's an ongoing need for training and education in the standards and guidelines. Both municipal staff, community members, building owners need to be aware of the information base, and there's always a need to identify a broader range of resources. So those are all things that we think they're not left out, they will occur over time.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Luxton, and I sincerely appreciate, point number 11, which is that feedback loop about everything that we're looking to put into place. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Councillor Mancinelli, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for all the information so far. I really appreciate it. I can totally understand the comments on tax growth when applying this policy in terms of a commercial building or an apartment building or something of that nature. I'm having a hard time getting my head around how that applies to a residential house, though. Can you kind of put a little bit of light on that situation for me, how that would evolve?
Through the chair, certainly. So again, back to the tracking that the Victoria Heritage Foundation has been undertaking for decades. A restored, well-maintained heritage property has risen in assessed value 29% higher than standard building stock. So it's the prestige of owning the building, it's the condition of the building that makes it somewhat more valuable. So it does continue to add value to the property. These incentives are not windfalls for owners. They're investments in the building. It doesn't matter who the owner is. And that's a really important point that we had to emphasize in setting up those original heritage foundations in BC, was that the owner didn't take the money and go to Hawaii. The owner had to show receipts that he'd actually put the roof on the house, and we had to inspect it. So as this investment occurs in the buildings, it's making them more valuable. So it is being tracked as coming back to the city in increased tax assessments. Now that means the value of the building is going up, which in general is not a bad thing. It means the building is loved and maintained. So that building will continue to pay appropriate property taxes.
Okay. One more question. A lot of the information we're receiving right now is based on best practices and history through other municipalities throughout Canada and North America. There's some great plans that have been talked about here and funded over the past 4 decades you've mentioned. One thing that I'm thinking very strongly right now is we're kind of in a unique situation right now where we have to look to the forward out to 2050 with sustainability. There's no formal plan on that, but along with that, there comes a responsibility for helping to attain that sustainable designation or accomplishment through the residents we represent, and there's going to be financial pressure to achieve that as well. Everything you've talked about preserving heritage has been without this pressure on a municipality. With only being one taxpayer and this being a new way of thinking, any thoughts and insights on overlaying these or how they might heal against each other or importance of them when stacked against each other?
Through the chair, again, I see no conflict. We deal with this in all our municipal work. Sustainability is the key focus and lens and has been for a number of years. I point to the many different levels of work that have been done on the question of sustainability and heritage, and I point to the famous saying by Carl Elefante that the greenest building is the one that's already there. So one of the key issues is, and I appreciate and fully embrace the importance of sustainability. I want our planet to survive too. And so we ensure that our projects have ways to become more sustainable. And we have many ways to do that. But also we have to be careful that we can't build our way to sustainability. We can't tear down every building we have to build a sustainable building. We couldn't do it fast enough and it would cause more disruption. We have to work with not just heritage buildings, but I would suggest very strongly with existing buildings. And most of our buildings are going to be there in 2050 that are currently built. So it's a bigger, broader approach that we have to take to existing buildings to upgrade them all. And that will include the heritage buildings as well. Heritage buildings are also a very small percentage of our total buildings. In some cases, 0.5%, in some cases 1%, in some cases much less than that. So we've also got to deal with the other 99% of our buildings that are not energy efficient. So those are really key issues. But I point to the fact that we have acceptable alternate solutions for heritage buildings that will achieve energy performance, and we have heritage conservation projects that have been certified as LEED Platinum. So we can do it.
Understood. Just to follow up, just to give a little bit of my understanding first, I fully understand the amount of emissions caused by a demolition and a rebuild will far exceed any type of renovation done on a building as long as the building's in structural shape. So I know that that's a big piece out of the way for why heritage has to go forward. Having said that, with the expansion of the responsibility, would it be smart to concentrate on sustainability of heritage buildings as opposed to the cosmetics to make sure the money reaches far enough going towards that 2050 goal? Has anyone talked about this or thought about this?
through the chair, absolutely, this should be a key focus. I point to, again, the example of the Vancouver Heritage Foundation, which in their grants has a specific stream for performance improvement and funds everything from energy assessments to storm windows to any number of things that make heritage buildings more efficient. And there's sort of two aspects to this. There's the building envelope itself, which we tend to focus on because it's the appearance of the exterior. But the internal part of the building, the structural part and the stuff you generally don't see or declare heritage, also needs to function. So often we get incredible results on commercial projects and residential projects with improved mechanical systems. So those are something that we often can capture in complete rehabilitation costs. So for example, the work that was done on the College Avenue building involved a complete top to bottom rebuild of mechanical, electrical, plumbing, insulation, improvement of the general performance of the building. We have to take that approach to make buildings really continue to function over time. So as part of those upgrades, we always consider energy performance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Councillor Pandura, go ahead.
I got the light up. Thank you, through the chair. Mr. Luxton, question. In your opinion, should some properties come off the list? And then second, to follow up, is our list has too many, or is our list too big to handle?
Through the chair, a tough question. We have been, over the last couple of years, working very closely with the planning department on the crafting of statements of significance for buildings that and identifying their heritage value. The question of coming on or off a list is really one of management. This has been the challenge with the holding bylaw, which protects the property, just freezes it in time, as it were, that some of those buildings have deteriorated. We hope that this process will be realistic. A building identified for its heritage value doesn't mean that it will absolutely survive. We have many cases where there are catastrophic events, where there's structural failure, where economic viability can't be achieved, and a building can be, quote unquote, let go. We don't recommend wholesale gutting of a list until we understand the potential for conservation, because we can't at this point guarantee that a building owner won't take advantage of the incentives and preserve their building. In terms of the properties that have been identified to date, again, a lot of them have been on that list for many years, and our thinking in heritage has changed over time. I point to our increased value we now give to our Indigenous populations and their cultural heritage values, as just one example of how our thinking has broadened beyond what we used to think of as our heritage. So different communities, different cultures have different things that are important to them that help them in terms of their comfort in the city, their placemaking, their neighborhoods. We want to think more broadly about history, and therefore we think there will be other sites that will be identified. And as the part of the work we've done for the city on the thematic framework, we identified categories of buildings that really weren't identified yet or had not been fully studied. And we will see more as we move out into the neighborhoods and also as our buildings age over time. So we sometimes see the value of buildings built in the post-World War II era which we might not have recognized 30 years ago. So it's a process rather than a goal of a certain number of buildings. I think where we are right now is we've all felt that what has been identified to date is comfortable. There may be some we lose and some we add as we move forward. I can't give you a number, but I can say that the process would be sound for identifying sites moving forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luxton. Financially, in your opinion, again, as you did the research, when and where do we draw the line on the finances? Because, I mean, commercial and residential values are different. So financially then, how do we treat those two differently or same? As in, you mentioned in page 2, you've got different numbers for and $1. How do you treat the commercial and residential difference on the rehab? One could be 10,000 and one could be million.
Through the chair, one of the things that the thinking that we have brought to our recommendation is that we have to think about the different categories of building ownership. And that was something that wasn't clearly sorted out in previous incentives. They are different scale. A downtown commercial concrete building with terracotta cladding is way different than somebody's house. Houses tend to be of a size and scale that is one thing. Commercial properties, which also have profit motivation, are another. Institutional buildings like churches are, again, another approach required. So these are all different. We've calibrated as best we could right now what we think are the incentives that are going to be effective for each category. And we recommend trying it out and then monitoring and reporting back on how the incentives are being taken up on different projects. So often we do this through a pro forma. We will ask the owner, especially on commercial projects, doesn't make any sense on a residential project, but on a commercial project, we'll ask an owner for a financial pro forma to show the need. What is the premium cost of heritage? Everybody has to put a roof on their building, but if you have terracotta, how much is it going to cost to repair that terracotta or replace blocks that have failed? And what is the heritage cost of this work? And that's what we're trying to do, is get to an appropriate assessment of these applications so that we know the money is going into the heritage components of the project, but also can involve building rehabilitation that will make the buildings perform better and more efficient. So one of the key things we're looking at is viability over time, that we're putting incentives into properties that will be maintained and will be there in the future.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Ventura. I just have a question. I addressed this a while ago to administration, and they weren't aware of it at the time. I'm not sure if you are. I was approached by a person with a heritage property, and the problem and the concerns with some of these heritage property is our ground is not made to have buildings last for 200 years. But the cost of lifting this building up, and I do believe he said piles would put underneath it. Can you talk a bit about that? I mean, the cost effective to doing something like that, it just doesn't pay out in the end. And how can we address this, or have you ever come up with these issues with other buildings?
Through the chair, thank you for a very difficult question. We encountered this very much in our work on College Avenue, but also in buildings in Calgary after the Bow River flood. In BC, we tend to have to put all our money into seismic upgrading, but on the prairies, you really need good foundations. And so part of ensuring that buildings will survive, period, is often underpinning structurally. And so you may or may not know that Dark Hall was underpinned back in the 1980s, which is the reason that it was able to be rehabilitated. So, and there's buildings that have been lost in Regina because it was not possible to save them structurally because of the costs of the foundation work. So this is something that we would see as a general rehabilitation cost, much as we would in BC at the cost of seismic is always a critical part of making the building economically viable and preserving it. So these are tough issues that need to be struggled with, but it is certainly a factor moving forward that the foundations have to be, you can't just put a new roof on the building, you have to think about it holistically. So that is one of the reasons that we seek to move towards kind of a pro forma and a structural assessment of properties as part of the granting of incentives, that we want to understand the buildings holistically.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Further questions from council? I thank you very much for attending here at Executive and ask you to please leave the meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll now call upon Steve Pinnell. Thank you, Mr. Pinnell. Thank you. Please. I'd ask you to please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you're representing, and if any, and where you're from. You have 5 minutes to address City Council or Executive Committee, and you'll have the opportunity to ask you questions after. Thank you. Welcome.
So my name is Steve Pinnell. I represent the Nicor Group of Companies. I'm from Regina, and I had submitted a letter to council earlier. I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple of points. Most of them have actually already been touched on with the discussions, so I'll kind of just go through it quickly. We just really wanted to, in our history with working with the city, commend the city both in the past work that's been done in setting up these heritage programs, as well as the continued work, obviously, that's been undertaken to improve them. There's some specific items I pointed out in the this new considered policy that are really going to help kind of from an on-the-ground perspective, working with the city administration, with my role in the company in the consulting department. I really do see a lot of those day-to-day things, and some of the items in this updated policy are going to help that a lot. The additions to this policy and the improvements in it are going to, we feel, assist in creating a better, more successful program. One of the key things that's been spoken to about a lot, we obviously deal more with the commercial aspect of it than the residential. It is great that the program is being looked at reclassifying. I know we had spoke to this a year or two ago about the difference between a residential building, a house, and a commercial. And the old system really didn't have anything provided for a heritage house in the way that it could provide for a commercial building through the tax incentives. So the addition of a grant procedure or policy is going to improve that a lot. But just some administrative improvements in the way that the policy is run will help the users of the policy, but also the administration that we work closely with in being able to effectively run that policy. Obviously, success of these policies is going to help the city move and continue to move towards its goals laid out in the cultural plan and some of the other plans that the city has. And finally, one of the big things, obviously, what is the cost of all of this? And there's been obviously some discussions, tax increment financing being one of the main ones that we deal with. The grants obviously are a budget line item that you can kind of visualize and see. But the tax incentives, I know there's been speaking of a cap or like a way to assess and view that. One of the improvements of the program is an application deadline being set. So instead of applications coming all throughout the year, council and executive can consider the applications at one point in the year and understand what the potential impact would be if you have one application or 100 applications. But just understand the underlying concept of that tax increment financing, allowing for investment now to provide a lot of benefits in the future, both obviously in the restoration and continued use of our heritage properties, but also financially in increasing that rent roll in the future. What you put in will be eclipsed in the future in what the city gains, and I feel like that is a great growth model and sustainability. Financial sustainability, not speaking to the actual energy sustainability. So basically, I just wanted to lay out a couple of points that I had put forward in my letter, and just today to speak in favor of the policy in front of executive.
Thank you, Mr. Pennell. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Stevens, go ahead.
Appreciate the support. NICOR has a long history of rehabilitating heritage properties. Great success. You've built a market on this. But council also hears from folks who tell us it's impossible, as if we're proposing they build a pyramid and it's just technically not feasible. We can set great policy here, but what role does the industry play, from the architects, the engineers, and also the development firms such as your own, to actually inform themselves on the value, the importance, and the feasibility of advancing heritage, that it's not just something to be destroyed?
Yeah, that's the difficult one. As you might be aware, the use of this program can kind of encapsulate that and provide you a view. While we look at, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the, kind of each year over the past 5 years, a few $100,000 each year, the uptake in the use of the program has not been overly large. If you look at the number of applications through this, it's not a large space. I think we deal with a majority of them, if not in some years all of the applications. So yeah, we have proved that you can economically make these buildings viable. Taking out the heritage considerations, just looking at it as a building, these buildings can be made viable, and that can reap back towards the city and our overall collective. But sometimes there are additional costs in these heritage buildings, and if we want to, again, demolish everything and build new every 10 years, that's probably not a sustainable option, but that is an option. Whereas if we want to keep the heritage that we have generated, we do need professionals in order to inform. There can be policies, but not every citizen reads and understands all the policies. So we do need people in place to help inform of the value of this and how it can be successful. And the fact that it is a little bit more difficult on a heritage property to maintain it, to keep some of that character element, that's where these city policies come in to provide some support on that. And just takes information and education for owners to know that that's a viable option.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Mayor Masters, please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Mayor. Thanks for your presentation. I believe the statement you finished with it just takes information and education. Can you save every heritage building?
I think, as it was pointed out before, not every building, some are too far gone. Some buildings are not economic, regardless of their structural capabilities, are not economically viable. But I think a vast majority of them likely are. So saving every building, probably not. As Mr. Luxton pointed out, some that we've already identified are probably not in that category and might need to be considered being removed. But for every one we remove, we're at a fairly good place, I think, in our current level of what we're trying to accomplish. So if we remove one, you can add another one that we might not have considered 10, 20 years ago when these lists were being developed. So save every single one of them, probably not, but starting and doing our best to save what we can, and not only save, but make them viable. Empty buildings in the middle of cathedral and stuff like that, in every area in the city, but I'm just thinking of one of mine that we worked on, being revitalized and now a successful part of the community. I think it's worthwhile, even if one is saved through a policy, let alone the size and the scale that we hopefully can get this to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Councillor Berchiani, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Pennell, for coming forward. Just in regards to, you talked about financial sustainability. So in the case that, say, we have many come forward, you indicated that there's an end date for people to apply. But if we get a lot in 1 year, what would be your suggestion of how we determine who gets to move forward in the program and who doesn't, through the chair, if there's no cap?
Yeah, that's I suppose a difficult question. It's not something that we've probably had to consider in the past. Like I said, given the previous usage of the program. But as you make improvements to the program and as you make the program more known, I suppose there is a potential where there could be, like I said, 100 applications for the HBRP program to come through in a given year. I don't know the financial obviously can't, you bring in $1 million of taxes in a year, you can't give out $1 million, otherwise we won't have roads and services and everything. So there obviously has to be consideration on, you can consider it a budget being put forward of, this is what we're expecting or capable, and trying to plan for that. And, we've seen a couple $100,000 in incentives for each of the past 5 years, trying to estimate that and looking if that's going to grow and being aware of what we're anticipating. I think that's the biggest thing, being prepared for, well, we were expecting about 500,000 this year in 5 years from now. But 5 years from now, there's 50 applications and it's 5 million of requested. Then we would have to look at identifying the value and the effectiveness of certain buildings versus others. I know the grading system was spoken to, and that is a very difficult topic in wanting to put a number or a value on one building versus the other. But if it does come down to it, you would need to make certain considerations on viability of a building or a project versus just the straight ability to do the 5 that are in front of you. So I would likely say that council or executive needs to consider a projection of, in conjunction with Mr. Luxton, of what you're actually anticipating to come forward in any year over the next 5-10 years, and be prepared for that. And then if we deviate from that, then we need to get into considering what to do about that.
Okay, thank you for that. In the work that you guys do, appreciate you've been doing this for many years. How would we now look at any of the work that gets done to ensure that that work does get done? So now if we're looking at, I know you do mostly commercial, but if we're looking at residential, how would that be done? Would that be done through then city staff, or would it be done through, like, who goes out to monitor that all these changes get done to renovate to, I guess, the renovation piece?
Yeah, for everything that's put forward as a proposal, there's 2 steps involved in ensuring that it is a real thing that happens. Obviously, the construction effort happens and the receipts are submitted through to administration for review. From there, we also are required to submit the architect's review. So there'll be a conservation plan put in place detailing if you're going to do work on the terracotta masonry, it has to be done in X, Y, and Z fashion. So they will undertake and provide a simple but straightforward report on, yes, the work that was done to these specifications. And usually in stuff like that, the architect's involved during the construction process as well. But at the end, there will be a report from the architect, as well as a member of administration, as I understand, does go out to inspect each one. So we've, in some of our projects, connected a member of administration with the construction company or the architect to go on site and confirm the work that was submitted. So there's kind of a 2-step process there.
After completion, okay. Last question I have is in regards to, you talked about public education. What because these are public funds, and in your experience, has there been any plaques or anything that have gone on these properties to, I think, educate and promote that these are heritage homes or commercial properties? Is that something that you would deem that would be important moving forward, that these are financial dollars that are coming from the general public that are deeming these heritage and the work being done? Through the chair.
Yes, that's actually a very good idea. Making it visible to the public and so that people can understand the importance of these buildings, as well as that these buildings have been successful projects. NICOR did actually undertake a building in Cathedral, same one I was speaking to before, an apartment complex, had rehabilitated it, made it a successful part of the community. We did, from our own funds, put up a plaque on the building. Unfortunately, the commemorative plaque was stolen, and I know the news ran a piece about that when that happened, but so unfortunate events like that can happen, but we did put up a plaque on one of our properties, and I think that goes to show that even if there's a cost associated with that, it does help in that community education piece. Our company is out there preaching heritage and that it can be successful and don't be afraid of it. And, we had spoken to, afraid to change a light bulb and the control aspect of it. And we do our best to educate on that aspect as well, in that, yes, you will have some architectural controls, mainly on the front facade, but that it's not a scary thing, or shouldn't hopefully be a scary thing, and that it's a successful, positive thing. But anything we can do to further that, from plaques to any education that can be put forward, is good. We try to do our part out there in the community, but every piece helps.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Any other questions? No. Just a quick question. You touched on, do we want to build everything and then tear it down in 10 years? From your knowledge, and I'm just throwing this out, it's kind of an off-course question. Modular homes, how long what is their lifespan for them?
Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to provide an educated opinion on that. Obviously, it's a newer thing, but yeah, I don't have enough of an opinion on that.
That's fine. And just to kind of further from what Councillor Bresciani said, I know that there's been talk amongst myself and some other people of when these heritage buildings come up, that they're showcased on our website and the plaque in front. Because I myself, when I came to Regina, I was trying to do a heritage tour, and I know that there's some information, but it really wasn't enough for me to really get a good grasp on it. And I just think that that's something moving forward that we could possibly do as a city, to really say, your tax-paying dollars went to something, and here's what we've seen, and showcase a little bit more. So
it's a funny, we do the Halloween yards, we do the Christmas light yards, and you can go online and there's a map and you can drive around, and some poor streets get clogged with cars at the time, but we can accomplish that and show off our light displays. We should be able to put together something that tracks the projects that have been done, the successful nature of them, a little bit of backstory on the history of the building and the project, and like you said, showcasing that it is now a successful part of our society and community.
So I'll keep that in the back of my mind. I'll keep going with it. Thank you very much. I see no further questions. You're free to leave if you'd like.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks. We have Jackie Schmidt on the line as a delegate. Jackie, are you there? Can you hear me? Jackie, can you hear us? Because we can't hear you. Jackie, can you unmute your line? Just bear with us for a couple minutes here. We're having some technical difficulties. we find you, Jackie? Can you hear us? Jackie, can you hear us here at council?
Can we find you, Jackie? Can you hear us?
Yeah. Hi, Jackie. We can hear you, but barely. We're just having some. Okay, we're going to. Hi, Jackie. Welcome to the meeting. Can you please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you're representing, if any? You'll have 5 minutes to address Executive Committee, at which time you'll have the opportunity to respond to any questions we may have. Ms. Schmidt, go ahead, please. You have 5 minutes. Ms. Schmidt, we can't hear you. Can you hear us? Anybody like to sing a song? Jackie, can you hear us? Hey, what should we do? I think Ms. Schmidt is leaving and going to call back in. Just give us a second here. Anybody like to sing a song? I'll take that as no. We'll just give her a couple minutes to get back on the line. Oh, Ms. Schmidt, I've been given instructions to move on. I'm not sure what we're going to do and how we're going to address that later. Councillor Hawkins?
Madam Chair,
Oh,
I'm just going to suggest that if you're going to ask administration for comments, I can move the report, administration to make the comments,
and then we can speak to that. Ms. Schmidt, did you just call back in?
Yes, I did.
Okay, there, we can hear you, Ms. Schmidt. Thank you. We were having some difficulties. Would you?
Thank you.
Thank you, and nobody wanted to sing. Please introduce yourself for the record and the organization that you're representing, if any, and you'll have 5 minutes to address executive. Go ahead, Ms. Schmidt.
Hi, my name is Jackie Schmidt, and I represent Heritage Regina. Heritage Regina is writing in support of the Heritage Building Rehabilitation Program Review document and the proposed amended Heritage Incentives Policy. After having a variety of opportunities to participate in consultation with both Luxton and Associates and with the social and cultural development staff, Heritage Regina feels that the rehabilitation document lays out a foundation for supporting the preservation and conservation of Regina's historical places and our intangible cultural heritage. The document sets out a framework for heritage policy and supporting regulation and bylaws. The proposed heritage inventory policy creates the possibility of offset costs related to conservation and preservation and assisting building owners in their desire to contribute to the heritage landscape of the city. Preserving heritage costs money, but it is a sound economic investment, increases tourism, and has many environmentally positive impacts. The Heritage Resource Branch, Government of Saskatchewan document, Economic Benefits of Heritage Conservation, states, investing in the preservation and rehabilitation and ongoing use of heritage buildings and other historic places has economic benefits for both individuals and communities. Heritage conservation can lead to higher property values and increased tax revenues, more jobs, revitalized neighborhoods, and economic growth. In Canada and the U.S., Main Street projects that link heritage conservation and economic development have created thousands of new jobs and businesses and stimulated millions of dollars of investment in historic downtowns. A Canadian study compared price trends for designated and non-designated properties in 14 Ontario communities. It found that 59% of those designated properties appreciated faster than the market average. A further 15% appreciated at the average cost rate. The designated properties also held their value better in market downturns. The same document describes heritage tourism as a growth industry. In Saskatchewan, 64% of respondents to a recent study said they had visited a historic building or site in the previous year. In addition to traveling in large numbers, heritage tourists also stay at their designations longer and spend more than other travelers. As an added benefit, the promotion of historic places as tourist attractions help local residents develop a greater understanding and appreciation of their own culture and heritage. The Heritage Conservation Branch Government Saskatchewan document, Environmental Benefits of Heritage Conservation States, an analysis of a building's impact over its entire life cycle will often show that it is more environmentally sound to reuse a building than to demolish it and build new, even if the new building would use less operating energy. When a building is demolished, its embodied energy is lost. Even if a replacement building is energy efficient, it will be decades before savings in operating energy outweigh the embodied energy of the old building, the new energy used in the demolition, and the energy needed for the new construction. Reusing buildings also limits carbon dioxide emissions, even when a house is replaced with a new energy efficient one. It can take 35 to 50 years of efficient operation to compensate for the CO2 that was emitted during the new construction. In Canada, it is estimated that between 1 and 2 million tons of demolition waste were sent to the landfills in 1996. Considering these points of fact about the conservation of heritage homes, commercial buildings, heritage spaces, and the stories that go with each of them, it is easy to see the investment in an incentives program has returns and positive impacts far more valuable than the initial outlay of the cost to the City of Regina. These benefits will also continue to have positive impacts far into the future. The Social and Cultural Department staff have committed to further consultation with Heritage Regina on additional policy development stemming from the recommendations in the rehabilitation report. Heritage Regina is pleased to be a part of that ongoing work and appreciates the city's commitment to further development of progressive and supportive heritage policies. We congratulate the city on the review and subsequent policy that has been described by experts as being progressive and having the potential to have many positive impacts on our cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Does anybody from committee have any questions for Ms. Schmidt? I see none. Jackie, you're free to leave the meeting. There's no questions from the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah, I'm going to have someone move a motion to receive and file the following communications with respect to the EX 22-29 Heritage Building Rehabilitation review. EX 22-28, EX 22-30, EX 22-31, and EX 22-32. Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. We'll now consider EX 22-29 Heritage Building Rehabilitation Program Review. Can I ask Ms. Bryden from Administration to introduce the report, please?
Thank you. Through the chair. So the city hired Donald Luxton and Associates to conduct a review of Regina's Heritage Building Rehabilitation Program and identify ways to encourage more heritage conservation in Regina, as well as ensuring heritage incentives are providing the necessary flexibility for property owners. The consultant met with City Council, property owners, realtors, and members of the development industry to understand strengths and areas for improvement within the current program, and gathered information on leading heritage conservation practice in other municipalities to inform the recommendations. You've heard Mr. Luxton's overview of the recommendations and alignment with leading practice in municipal heritage programs. Regina has a strong record of heritage designations and conservation practices. These recommendations represent the next step in the evolution of the city's conservation program, focusing on the importance of offering clear incentives and efficient processes to encourage residents to voluntarily designate and conserve their heritage properties. The city is positioned to implement several recommendations right away, including the expansion of the city's Heritage Incentive Program, strengthening collaboration with stakeholders, and improving communications materials and program information on regina.ca. These initiatives are supported by the results of the recent Heritage Conservation Survey in December of 2021, in which respondents selected those as the most important components of the city's Heritage Conservation Program. Administration is also currently working through implementation planning for the remaining recommendations in Mr. Luxton's report. These recommendations include improved heritage building maintenance, building code updates, permit application processing, and heritage evaluation and nominations, and will be presented for Council's consideration later this year. And we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Luxton. Can I have somebody move the report, please?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to move the report, and I'll have an amendment which is growing out of the questions. I first want to say, though, that I very much appreciate the work of Mr. Luxton and the staff in preparing this. It's been a very informative morning. Heritage is a reminder of what our city has been in the past and a promise of what we can become in the future. We're a young city in terms of building stock. There are advantages in this youth for a heritage policy. It reminds us of the importance, our youth reminds us of the importance of what we have here now and the need to preserve it. We have the advantage of starting early. Not too much has been lost. We have the advantage of making an investment which will pay off in the long term, has been pointed out in the discussion to date. And also has been pointed out, we can start small, we can educate, and we can grow. It was a very impressive report, impressive because of its clear values, its clear policy, and its clear process. And that is fair. It's fair because there are no surprises. No surprises to building owners and purchasers, no surprises to community planners, no surprises to developers and the construction industry. And no surprises means many, many fewer conflicts, and that is a real advantage in this report. I'd like, Madam Chair, to move an amendment to the recommendation that is before City Council. I've shared the amendment with the clerk, and I've discussed it briefly with the administration. It's an amendment which grows out of the questions and the answers that came this morning. I would read the amendment as follows, and I believe it can be shown on the screen. So as a number 2 in the recommendations, bring forward in Q3 of 2022 amendments to existing bylaws and regulations that will replace the current grade 1, grade 2 categorization system and adopt a categorization system based on a heritage assessment form and statement of significance, both based on the thematic approach outlined in the Luxton report. With respect to the amendment, I just say that as was pointed out by Mr. Luxton and others, that the grade 1, grade 2 categorization system is itself a heritage system that needs some renovation. It stigmatizes heritage properties in a way that's not meant was not meant to do, but by placing things as 1, 2 in a category, you lose the thematic importance that could be incorporated into the evaluations of properties for heritage purposes. So if I can get a seconder for that amendment, Madam Chair, I'd like to move that amendment, and I am moving the report.
Councillor Hawkins, we wouldn't need a second.
All right, you are.
Yeah.
Executive Committee, it looks so much like council. I'd like to remove the move the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Should we address the amendment first, or should we just go to administration questions? Okay, all right. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we'll be opening the floor to debate on the amendment. Does anyone from committee have any questions? Councillor Fundura, go ahead, please.
Question then to the administration, replacing the grade 1 and 2 as we're moving to the process now. What does that mean to what we want to achieve? Grade 1 will tell us what to do and how not to do. If we remove the grading system, what will that do? Madam Chair?
Through the chair, actually, I'll refer that to Ms. Hill.
Ms. Hill?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. So we'll be working through implementation planning over the next several months to understand the specifics of how the recommendation will be implemented. I think, initially the grading system was intended to support us in removing some of the conflict around designation of heritage properties when owners are reluctant. And I think, in fact, we found that has not been the case, that it hasn't supported us in objective assessment, and that there's often, varying opinions on the heritage significance of these properties. And so what this a removal of the grading system in combination with the incentive program allows is for administration to look at a broader variety of incentives to encourage homeowners and property owners to designate, and being able to bring that forward in terms of, what's the public benefit of conservation of a particular property, and our willingness as a city to invest in that property in order to encourage the owner to conserve.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fundura. Any other questions? I see none.
Councillor Shaw, I have my hand.
I don't have that on my screen, sorry. I have the amendment on my screen, but go ahead, Councillor Sikiniak.
Thank you. So I'm just looking for an explanation, from administration. So I understand this was within the recommendations, but the plan was not to move forward with this quite yet. So is there a reason? Does first of all, does administration support this amendment? And secondly, why was administration not yet planning to move forward with it initially?
Through you, Madam Chair. So yes, administration is supportive of this recommendation. Really, it was part of the work we had intended to do. This is just giving us more of a framework of when we need to have it done by.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you. I apologize for that. I just can't see the screen on whose hands are up, so I'm trying to go on with the next person. Councillor Bresciani, go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question was asked.
Well, all that kerfuffle for nothing. Any other questions from executive? I see none. Can you call the vote? Yeah, we'll call the vote on the amendment. Sorry, Councillor Hawkins, would you wish to close? Sorry.
No, I've said what I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk? Councillor Mole, I hear that you're joining us by phone. Can you give us a verbal recorded vote? Councillor Mole, can you hear us? Or text him.
Councillor Mole, can you hear us? Okay, we will assume that he has temporarily left the meeting and unable to disclose his vote.
All right. Sorry, Councillor Mole, we didn't hear back from you. That will go down as a, okay, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, we have 10 members voting in favor, so it carries unanimously with Councillor Mole temporarily away from the meeting.
Thank you. We'll go back to the main motion. Is there any questions for administration on the main motion? Councillor Stevens, go ahead, please.
Both the report by administration and Mr. Luxton's presentation talk about an environmental sustainability piece related to the landfill, recycling, and so on. This is more a matter of an undertaking, and if administration would like to comment, that would be greatly appreciated. But in future work on landfill diversion, recycling programs, et cetera, if administration could consider the implications of either through bylaw incentives of actually preventing a lot of this waste from going to the landfill, or if we can actually develop a recycling process or bylaw dealing with housing, is that something that could be considered in the research that will come before council in the future?
Mr. Henry, go ahead. I think, do I have your mic on? No, I don't.
Thank you, through the chair. Excuse me. Thanks for the question, Councillor. That is work that is coming in the next phase of our work being done in Waste Plan Regina. So the industrial and commercial traffic to the landfill in regards to demolition products is one of the items that we will be taking into consideration and doing some work around. That's kind of the final phase of our recycling program.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Stanishek, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through the chair. Just, I have a question just to clarify table 2, which is on page 3 of the report. The tax exemptions under the Heritage Incentive Policy. So the municipal levy and the total levies, can you just clarify what the other levies are besides the municipal levy? Is it education or is it something else?
Thank you, through the chair. We'll get this right yet. Yes, that is the total tax levies, so that would include library and education.
Library and education. Okay, thank you. That's all I had, just to clarify.
Thank you. Do I see any further questions? Oh, Councillor Sakiniak, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering if administration can give a comparison, just for our information, of the entire budget ask for the Heritage Incentive Policy work for 2022 versus 2023. You have that available through the chair?
Would anyone have that?
Through the chair, Emmeline, speak to that.
Oh,
Ms. Hill.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. Confirm if I haven't understood the question, but on page 2 of the report, we outline the approved expenditures for 2022, and then how we anticipate that those will increase in 2023. So the main increase is an additional $100,000 for the grants. and an additional $20,000 within community investments to support community-based organizations' work on heritage initiatives.
I think the reason why I saw that, the reason why I asked the question is because I guess not included in that table would be the amount that we paid for the consultant in 2022 to do this work. And so I don't know if there's other things that aren't included, but when I was considering the year-to-year ask, I was wondering if it's actually more in 2023, considering the expenses that we've incurred to actually develop this new policy. So do you have any further information on that?
Through the chair, the cost of the consultant was just under $50,000, and that was paid for out of previous year's budgets. The work was complete in 2021 for the most part. The other major expense that I'll note is being funded through our REC capital budget, and that's the analysis and evaluation of properties that are on the heritage inventory. And it works out to between $1,200 and $2,500 per property, and we're doing those in buckets of 40 properties at a time, again with consulting services provided by Luxton and Associates. So that's a cost that is just allowing us to work through that backlog of properties that are on the heritage inventory right now and understand the heritage significance of each of them.
Okay, thanks. So my next question is in relation to the environmental impact section. So I'm wondering if administration is considering a separate program for energy efficiency retrofits for heritage buildings than other buildings, or if that's to be determined. That's my first one.
I can start through the chair, and then there may be other comments. So energy upgrades and retrofits for efficiency are an allowable cost within this program that's in front of you today. And so they can be incorporated within the eligible conservation costs. But whether there's additional programs that might be contemplated, there may be other comment regarding that.
Ms. Brodin, did you want to add further to that?
I have, through the chair, thank you. No, I have nothing to add.
Okay, that's fine. And I just wondered also in that section, it mentions, that I'm not looking at it right now, but something that this work will align with the energy and sustainability framework. So I'm just wondering if, especially based on the conversations and the questions today, if there's any additional thoughts of how it will align, or if that's still to be determined.
Through the chair, Ms. Hill.
Through the chair, it's to be determined. It's conversations that we're having with that team as they move forward with development of the framework.
Okay, thanks. And then just one final question. I'm just curious, in the survey, so I don't have the appendix number, Appendix C. So I noticed that most postal codes had just a few responses, but one of them had 18 responses. And I couldn't tell based on the colors because they're very close. So I'm curious, number one, which postal code that was. Secondly, does administration have an idea of why one postal code ended up responding, in comparison to the others, significantly more to the survey?
Who would like to take that one?
Ms. Hill.
Ms. Hill, go ahead.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. It's not something that I have precise information on right now, but we could certainly look into that with the communications and engagement team and provide some comment back.
Sure, that'd be fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sakiniak. Councilor Brusciani, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. In regards to the financial impact, I just want to go back there, Table 1. The policy analyst can you just tell me, we'll have a city planner, full-time city planner, a policy analyst. What is the policy analyst? What is the full-time job they'll be doing in 2023? Through the chair. The policy will be developed, of course, as we pass this. What would be the job there? Through the chair.
Ms. Bryan, you'd like to take that?
Ms. Hill?
Through the chair, the policy analyst position will be responsible for administration of the incentives program and the management of the places of interest, inventory, and designation lists. And so this is a position that we have in other areas of the organization, reviewing incentive programs and then ensuring that the analysis of the impact of those incentive programs is monitored and reviewed and brought forward for consideration.
Thank you. I saw in the report somewhere there would be some kind of a heritage board set up, or someone that would actually look at these applications. Can you further explain that through the chair?
Through the chair, we're looking at two mechanisms to have ongoing support and engagement with community. The first is a sector reference group. And so that will be a standing committee that will advise administration on a variety of topics related to heritage. And then the second is an incentive review panel that will be specific to the review process and timing around that on an annual basis. And so really looking to incorporate consistent processes of engagement and review with our community experts.
Okay, thank you for that. In regards to the, just want to be clear on the financial, 150,000 for 2022 is the grants and maintenance. 250,000 is for 2023. But I need to clarify, and I asked the question earlier, if we get an influx of applications, we have a deadline date. If you can confirm what that deadline date is, and if we get more requests, how will that be fulfilled through this policy, through the chair?
Through the chair, the process is to have an intake of applications, which we're anticipating in year one may be a little smaller, which is the reason for a slightly reduced budget figure this year. And so having an intake of applications, compilation by administration, and then review by the incentive review committee. And that review committee will be looking at a number of different criteria to prioritize applications. And so things like the degree to which the investment is critical to the long-term viability of the property, the heritage value of the property, the degree to which they've been able to access incentives in the past, in order to prepare a docket of recommendations for council on both the tax exemption and the grants. And so those will come back to council in the fall of this year for your review and hopefully approval. So I'll just note that the incentive panel will be looking at only going up to that maximum amount of it that's been approved in budget for the grants. And in terms of the tax exemptions, I definitely have heard the concerns of councillors that there could be, a financial impact there. And so one thing to note is that it is deferred to some degree. We would anticipate that we would be able to approve projects in 2022, but most often those the actual receipts and tax exemption would not come into place until 2024 at the earliest. So in terms of financial planning, there is that delay where those impacts can be considered.
Okay. That's important, I think. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Rosciani. Mayor Masters. No? Sorry, you guys. I can't go. Councillor Massiali, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Through the chair, on table 2, you have the tax exemptions. I'm wondering how that tallies out through the years, if you can forecast a little bit how that grows through 22 and 23.
Through the chair, I don't have that information, but we can certainly gather that and send it back out.
Okay. On our last council meeting, we approved 3 heritage properties. Would that be included in this tally right here?
No, they would not. Through the chair, similar to the previous comment, that we would be looking for those receipts and sort of the follow-up reports on those approvals to come through later this year, and they would be included in the tax exemption bylaw beginning in 2023 for those properties, if the projects are complete. Sometimes there's an additional delay.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the report and where it's going. Viewing how I've dealt with heritage so far on council, I like the organization that's coming. The money's actually going to get spent towards something instead of just administratively through meetings and more meetings and more meetings. So I really like the forward momentum of this. Can someone explain to me, I can understand the business case that was explained when it comes to a commercial property or an apartment building on the investment in heritage, causing that to gain value and move back for the community overall in the long term. I still can't get my head how that would apply to a residential property, as they referred to. If my understanding is correct, the property is assessed on its age, the materials it was built with, the surrounding property values. When I look at what's been discussed as heritage properties for my term in council so far, many of those properties wouldn't have been affected of the value or the increase that this is supposed to bring about. Could I get some comment on that, please?
Ms. Bryden?
Thank you, through the chair. So, changes due to heritage work may not have a direct impact on the assessment value of a property, and it might be seen more over time. In Saskatchewan, we do have mass appraisal based on market value. So as properties gain market value, then you would see their assessments go up, but it might not be a direct correlation to the work done for heritage.
Okay. From what I've witnessed on council so far, many of these heritage properties are in prominent neighborhoods that already have quite a value associated with them, and they're one-offs. When I think of the intent of the heritage, I can apply it to an area like the cathedral area as a whole for the time it was built, the amount of rebuild needed to accomplish things and trying to accomplish sustainability and character in our city. On the flip side, the one-offs that we've dealt with and in the neighborhoods they are, I feel like I'm using the tax dollars spent by the residents I represent to subsidize. Is there anything that you can vision to mitigate these circumstances somewhat? I don't know how else to put it. I want to preserve heritage when it's due. I want to build the neighborhoods where the older houses exist. I understand the importance. I guess at the end of the day, I don't want to subsidize $1 million properties to do it either, to beautify them. With all the requirements for sustainability, many of them are going to be in the older neighborhoods that would be under heritage names if they weren't lived in by prominent people. With that prominence comes the areas where we might subsidize. Could we concentrate more on the age of the infrastructure, the community around it, and the community as a whole when we're applying these, as opposed to the one-offs and more so extravagant neighborhoods? Is there a way to incorporate those thoughts into what we're trying to achieve?
Ms. Bryden?
Thank you, through the chair. I think I'll refer that one to Ms. Hill to talk about how these would be reviewed.
That was a lot to say, I'm sorry.
Through the chair, I think part of the answer to the question is this concept of values-based evaluation. And so, really thinking about properties not just as major landmarks or mansions and sort of sites of rich and powerful city builders, but also stories that are attached to to just different communities and different ways of participating in the city. And so the concept of attaching the evaluation framework to the themes of Regina's development is really important in that, and being able to consider those themes holistically. The other thing that we haven't talked a lot about today that's in Luxton's recommendations is thinking about different ways to recognize buildings. And so designation is not the only way to recognize the heritage value of a building. Walking tours that talk about sites that used to exist are also done, and we can commemorate properties through virtual means and exhibits. The work that Heritage Regina does, some of their lectures are about existing properties, but many are about things that we don't have represented physically in the city anymore, but we're still able to tell stories about those properties and how they contributed to the city's development. So I think the answer is that we need to take a broader approach to how we think about heritage and the meaning of this program, which is to be able to tell the full story of Regina and incorporate all of the different elements and people who've contributed to that in that story.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. I'm not one to cut somebody off for a long question. Councillor Hawkins, would you like to close the report, please?
Nothing further, Deputy Mayor, except to say again to Mr. Luxon, the consultants, those who made presentations as delegations, and the city staff for very fine work on this.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. We'll now vote on the report with the amendment. Main motion as amended. Okay. The amended motion. We're going to vote. Clerk, can you call the vote, please? I just want to let everyone know that Councillor Moll has left the meeting, so we won't have his recorded vote. Madam Clerk, please.
The main motion as amended carries 10-0 with everyone voting in favor, and as you had mentioned, Councillor Moll is away from the meeting.
Thank you. We have a delegation in the chamber, I do believe. No, he's on the phone. He's in the chamber, okay. For EX 22-6, I'd like to call upon Kenton De Jong. Did I pronounce your name right?
Thank you and good morning.
Okay.
I guess it's still morning.
Yes.
My name is Kenton DeYoung, and I represent the company Regina Cemetery Tours. I'm here to request a review or amendment to bylaw number 2008-27, section 37 and section 42. These sections state that, quote, no person shall permit or take part in any unauthorized event in the cemetery, end quote, without approval by the cemetery director, and that any person who operates these events can be fined $2,000 or be imprisoned no longer than 90 days. My concern is that this bylaw is that the word event is never defined. Currently, the going definition of an event is any activity held within the cemetery. However, this can include a picnic, a photographer doing a photo shoot, a family reunion, or a teacher taking the students on a tour or a tour of the headstones. Under section 37 of the bylaw, everybody I mentioned, including the students of the teacher, are in a violation of the law and could face fines and imprisonment. I do not believe any of these deserve those punishments, and the city probably doesn't believe this either, but these existing laws still say so. Saskatoon has a similar bylaw but their bylaw is less strict and has a minimum fine of $25 and a maximum fine of $500. The difference is that their bylaw specifically forbids games or sports to be played there, while our bylaw forbids everything. The bylaw came to my attention when I was attempting to organize tours of the Regina Cemetery in 2017. The purpose of my tours was to raise money for a monument for the victims of the Spanish influenza. Because I did not have insurance to operate the tours, I partnered with Heritage Regina to use their insurance instead. However, the money donated from the tours did not go towards the monument. Instead, it went towards their various programs. Fortunately, through private donations, we were able to achieve our goal and unveiled the monument in December of 2017. The tours continued in 2018, and all the money went towards Heritage Regina. After this, I chose to leave the board and organize the tours myself. I registered my own business, Regina Cemetery Tours, and began the process of getting proper insurance. The insurance company said I needed an event form from the Regina Cemetery prior to applying, but the Regina Cemetery refused to provide it. They stated that only Heritage Regina has permission to do tours of the cemetery. I then requested to do other types of tours, but my emails went unanswered. I then offered to donate all my proceeds from the tours to repair the cemetery, as it is in need of repair, and still got no response. It was only after I contacted a city councilman in 2019 that my emails were answered and my request was again denied. They stated that only Heritage Regina has authority to do tours of the cemetery. Unfortunately, Heritage Regina has not conducted any tours to the cemetery in 2019, 2020, or 2021. This is a huge blow to our tourism, but also to sharing our collective history. Last fall, on October 30th, 2021, I noticed a walking tour being conducted in the cemetery, one that was not done by Heritage Regina. When I contacted the city to ask about it, they informed me of an additional, quote, serial killer tour that had been held a week prior. They had no plans to find these individuals for operating these events in the cemetery. It appears the bylaw is not being followed and the city is not enforcing it. It then surprised me to see a pending amendment to the bylaw, section 39, subsection 4, that states, no person shall advertise, host, or carry on any tour, event, or commercial activity to be held in a cemetery or offer any goods or services in a cemetery except pursuant to a written contract between the city and the person. It then mentioned a still work in progress document called the Cemetery Tours and Event Policy. I cannot fathom why tours of the cemetery need such a specific policy, and why punishments to have these events in the cemetery are so extreme. The cemetery is meant for all people to enjoy, not just Heritage Regina, and the history belongs to everybody. With that said, I would like there to be a review of the current and proposed bylaw, number 2008-27, to define what exactly an event is, similar to the Saskatoon bylaw. If that's not possible, I'd like a clause added that only ticketed events or groups larger than 30 people require city approval. That way, families, teachers, and photographers will not be jailed or fined for enjoying the cemetery. The revision will also allow people to learn and embrace our local history through a variety of voices, not just that of a single nonprofit. I believe the bylaw was written with the best intentions in mind, but instead it silences voices and hinders our intangible cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Any questions from? Yeah, Councilor LeBlanc, go ahead, please.
Thank you for coming, Kenton. You mentioned you are in the business of giving historical tours of some of the cemeteries that might be outside of the bylaw. I wonder if you can just tell us what cemetery or cemeteries you're giving those tours of.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, I was referring to the Old Regina Cemetery on 4th and Broad. I was attempting to do tours of that in 2017, but I haven't been able to do them because of the bylaw and the insurance requirements.
Thank you. And just at a high level, what is historically significant, or why is it worth getting tours of that cemetery?
Thank you. Through the chair, there's a lot of history in the cemetery, from the first male citizen of Regina, the first burial of Regina, various mayors of Regina, victims from the Regina cyclone, from the Regina riot, people who supposedly were on the Titanic. They weren't on the Titanic. There's people who died during the Spanish flu. There's people who died through a lot of events of Regina's history, and it's all there in one collective space that nobody can take in and no one can experience and learn about. There's not a lot of opportunity in the city, in my opinion, to learn about our history, and the cemetery houses all those places in one location.
Thank you. And you may have said, but I just want to clarify, when you're looking to host tours of this sort, are you doing it as a for-profit business model or for some other reason?
When I first began, through the chair, when I first began doing this in 2017, I wanted to do it as an individual. I was then told to be better if I was a corporation or a business. I was then told to be better if I was a nonprofit organization. Either way, I have offered to donate 100% of the proceeds to repairing the cemetery. So if I was a for-profit organization, it would be profit done through other means, not through ticket sales.
Thank you. And then just to clarify your concerns with the draft bylaw, did I hear you right that your only concern is with respect to the proposed 39 sub 4 of that bylaw? Is that accurate?
That is a concern, but because the policy, through the chair, that is a concern, but because the policy is not quite completed yet, it's still in a draft form, I can't speak on it. I haven't seen it. My main concern is that the existing bylaw has verbiage in it that is too broad and the penalties are too extreme. I prefer if it mirrored that of Saskatoon's, where it's a little less extreme when it comes to punishing these activities.
Great, thank you. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you, Councillor LeBlanc. Councillor Hawkins, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. In Europe, cemeteries are used as parks, are used for strolling paths, are used for historical tours. They're very public places. Are you familiar with how cemeteries are used in Europe? And is that the kind of thing you're looking for here?
I haven't, through the chair, I haven't gone on any tours in Europe. I have gone through tours in other cities across Canada and some in the United States. But I do know in other cities in Canada, they have a lot of tours, historical tours or educational tours or self-guided tours. And through Ontario, I believe they even have some tours where there's people dressed up as historical characters. So they have a lot of different purposes, a lot of places across Canada. I can't speak for Europe. I'm not asking for anything like that. I'm just asking for a basic walking tour where people can tell stories and not necessarily dress up or reenact history.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Do you see any further questions? I just have a question, kind of a comment. I actually went to Cuba to go tour their graveyards and grave sites. I learned a lot of history of Cuba. They've gotten there. Is this something that, if we offered in Regina, that could be turned into some type of a tourism thing, I guess? I don't know what you'd call it. Is that possible? I mean, you know the history better than I do. Is this something that you could see in the future?
Thank you. And through the chair, yes, I do believe so. I see a lot of benefits to this being a part of the tourism spectrum in the city. Cemetery tourism, or they have it run forward, I don't recall what it is very popular, and it can bring in a lot of money, especially if that money is dedicated towards repairing the cemetery. A number of years ago, I spoke to some monument companies in the city, and they said the situation in the cemetery now is worse than in 2011 when it was vandalized. Headstones are falling apart, they need to be replaced, need to be repaired. There's no money for that. My idea is that these tours could help finance that and repair the cemetery and keep it for future generations to enjoy.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Nothing from the executive. You're now free to go, and I thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't even know. We'll now consider EX 26, cemeteries, funding structure, fee schedule, and bylaw amendments. Ms. Bryden, can you address this and introduce us to the report?
Thank you, through the chair. The city cemeteries require several major capital investments within the next 10 years to address aging infrastructure. Due to the recent Riverside Cemetery expansion project, the reserve does not have sufficient funds in order to fund operational expenses and smaller annual capital projects, as well as major capital investments. Cemeteries Administration collaborated with financial services to create a sustainable financial model for the future. A range of options were explored, and the recommendation is to fund major capital infrastructure projects, including future expansions and renovations, to the Maintenance and Administration Building through current contributions to capital going forward. Ongoing capital maintenance would continue to be funded from the reserve. In line with this model, administration is recommending a 4% fee increase for 2022, 2023, 2024, which is included in Appendix C of your report. The recommended bylaw amendments outlined in the report provide clarity around cemeteries' rules and regulations. The majority of new information being added to the bylaws surrounding interment scheduling and memorial installations and removals. And we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Barden. Do I have any questions from committee? Oh, okay. Oh, hold on here. Okay, sorry. Can I have somebody move the report in accordance, with the revised Appendix B as indicated in the adjustment memo received from the interim city clerk? What about that? Yeah?
I've already had a turn.
Doesn't matter whose turn. There, Councillor Stanichuk. Any questions from members on this report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'm going to ask questions regarding to the delegation and the questions that he was raising. With the bylaw that is being proposed, would there need to be an amendment to the bylaw, or would it be through policy? I guess my question is, through the chair, what policy exists right now, or would policy have to be developed in terms of who gets approval to do tours of the cemetery?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll refer that to Ms. Shaley.
Thank you. Through the chair, we do have some policy work that's currently underway and will be ready for spring to address this topic. The city does allow tours and events to take place within our cemeteries. However, it's important that we know what's taking place from a scheduling perspective so that we can appropriately schedule funeral services and burials to not conflict with these kinds of activities. As well, we hear from our citizens often, they are looking for a peaceful setting when they're visiting a cemetery. So we're just trying to take care in terms of when we schedule these kinds of activities. As I said, the policy is under development and will be ready in spring so that we're better able to consider these kinds of requests. And it'll include an application process so that we're aware of these kinds of activities. The portion of the bylaw that was referred to, I believe, was intended to provide support for addressing vandalism and that sort of thing within the cemetery, which I believe is why the penalties are quite extreme.
So through the policy, follow-up question through the chair. So through the policy, there wouldn't be, it would consider applications from numerous organizations or individuals to do tours, not just exclusively for Heritage Regina. Is that true, correct? Okay.
This is really intended to provide us with the information so that we're better able to schedule activities and we're aware of what's happening at any given time. We do receive requests from media and tour operators as well. So that's what the policy is intended to support. The kinds of activities that the delegation referred to would certainly be the kinds of activities that we would be able to support through the policy.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just one other question through the chair. The capital needs of our two city cemeteries, does any of the maintenance or capital costs deal with the condition of older headstones, or is that considered private? I'm not sure what the policy, what capital investments are needed. It mentions the maintenance shop and other upgrades, but do we deal with headstones at all if they're quite older headstones?
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Shaley.
Thank you. Through the chair, we do have a program that's in place right now at the Regina Cemetery to address some of the issues that are in place with the older, heavier headstones. And so we have a 5-year capital program that we initiated last year. Council had approved $30,000 per year in the last budget cycle, and that will continue over a 5-year period to complete the plan that's in place to address the issue.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Sanajak. Mayor Masters.
Thank you. The Deputy Mayor. I'm actually going to build upon something Councillor Stanajak just said. You're suggesting that the $2,000 fine isn't for events, but it's to prevent vandalism?
Ms. Bryden?
Through the chair, Ms. Shaley.
I believe that's what was intended when this was initially put in place. This is not a proposed amendment to the bylaw, but that's the way the bylaw is written right now. I'm going to ask Mr. Morgan, who is responsible for the cemeteries, to speak specifically to how that would be applied.
Through the chair, yes, that's accurate. It wasn't originally intended to deter vandalism, and if those individuals were caught, there would be a fine applied. There is from time to time activities that do take place outside of cemetery hours. For example, 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night. There's a safety risk when it comes to those type of things. So that's part of the reason why we've changed. We've developed the policy. We're in the process of developing that policy to put parameters to mitigate those kind of after-hour activities and deter. The fine is meant to really deter those kind of outside activities, outside of the normal operating hours.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Through the chair, in follow-up then, how many times have we fined somebody $2,000?
Ms. Bryden?
Through the chair, Mr. Morgan.
Through the chair, I cannot say that we've fined anybody in the last 10 years that I can recall.
Thanks very much for the answer. Through the chair, do we deter people from going to park space?
We don't. But with the condition of the cemetery and the monuments in there, it poses a significant risk to activities at sunset or at dark. So that's one of the reasons why the cemetery gates are locked and that we refrain from anybody entering into that.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Would it make some sense to you, based upon the delegation that was here today, to express concerns over it, to simply create a bylaw relative to vandalism? And if you want to create a schedule, I'm not crazy about the idea of an application. We have scheduling systems for all of our rec facilities. I'm not sure it's just not a scheduling system for a cemetery so that you can track things, but notwithstanding that, would it not make sense that, in terms of wanting to be in the cemetery, whether that's a photographer or someone doing a tour or whatnot, as long as you knew they were there, if that's your concern, would we not just create a bylaw specific to vandalism? Or I guess if it's under review, just redefine it?
Take this, Ms. Bryden?
Through the chair, I'll refer that. Oh, Mr. Weary.
Thank you. I can speak to that. Vandalism is a criminal offense, so in our view, I don't think we would recommend a separate bylaw for that. Just to clarify what's currently in the bylaw, the fine is to a maximum of $2,000. So what we would be permitted to have as a maximum in the Cities Act is $10,000. So the maximum fine in the current bylaw is reflection that this is not at the high end of even if offenses are committed at the high end of the range in terms of severity. So as Mr. Morgan has advised the committee, there have been no court matters that have been dealt with during my time dealing with bylaw court. So it's very rare that we do lay charges here. My recommendation to committee is that the fine provisions as currently worded are appropriate. It's a maximum fine, just to clarify. There's no minimum fine, so there would be discretion that would be allowed to a bylaw court judge if there ever was a charge. But to address the issue of vandalism, we would probably report significant vandalism to police. It'd be investigated as a criminal code matter, and we would potentially be able to seek restitution for any damages that were committed. And again, the monuments are the property of the individuals who purchased them. So we are responsible as the managers and operators of the cemetery to protect that property. So it is different than a park. But I think you heard from administration a policy that allows for some of these activities in a sort of controlled way to happen in the cemetery is something that administration, I believe, is reviewing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray. Through the chair, one final question. When we were doing the research, and clearly there's been extensive review of other cities, and there's a reference to Saskatoon's. When you spoke with Saskatoon, have they got significant issues that their policy is failing on?
Through the chair, no, we didn't see any indication like that. We did consult with other communities outside of Saskatoon. There have been no concerns with, it just seems to be with Regina over the last 10 years, there's 2 major incidents with vandalism in the cemetery.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Councillor Hawkins?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The cemeteries are not just places where people go to die. They're parks. They're historically important. They could be important for tourism. They're important for family reunions. And our cemeteries should be treated much like our parks. Of course, there has to be respect in the way we use our seminaries. Of course, there has to be safety preserved, order preserved. And we have, as the city solicitor has pointed out, criminal code mechanisms for dealing with vandalism. We also have regulations for dealing with our parks, which are probably appropriate when applied to cemeteries. Other cities deal with this. What we have here is a clause that's written in much too broad a term. We need a definition of events, a generous definition of events. We need to look at this in a whole different way. I'm pleased to see that, pleased to hear that the administration is going to bring back something on this. I'd ask them to look at many other examples and look at the cemetery as a place that is a public place where people go in remembrance, but people also go as a place of beauty. I'm going to support this. I support the bylaw, but I'm very much looking forward to the administration addressing this problem in the near future and bringing something back to council. I just want to check with the city manager that that is their undertaking.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we heard that loud and clear. Councillor Hawkins will be doing that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councillor Bresciani, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I too want to just ask in regards to the benches and trees, do we still promote families to donate to have benches in memory and trees in memory? And I would like to get an update as to how that is going. Through the chair.
Ms. Brodin?
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Morgan.
Through the chair, yes, we do. That program is still in place. We have legacy benches at the cemetery, as well as opportunities for legacy trees as well.
Thank you. Do we know, though, if there are people utilizing it, or what is the status quo of those programs? Because I think sometimes I'm not sure if we really promote them, but I'd like to know, are they working or are they not?
Yeah.
The chair.
Through the chair, we average 2 to 3 benches installation a year, as well as 2 to 3 trees a year. And when we compare it to the park spaces, where park spaces are about anywhere from 8 to 10 benches, as well as trees. So it's a good ratio to follow. So we're in line.
Okay, thank you. A few years ago, I was honored to be able to go to the Tree of Memories, which was at Riverside. It was one of the most, I think, favorable events for people who have lost a loved one. And this was to put an ornament on the tree in front of at Riverside with a little ceremony. Was done very nice. Can I ask why we've discontinued that through the chair?
Ms. Brodin?
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Morgan.
Through the chair, the Tree of Memories is still available for families to hang monuments on the tree. As far as the service, yes, that was discontinued approximately 2 years ago. It was just based on really the low amount of people attending. So it was one of those services that we looked at reducing. So the Tree of Memories is still there and available for the public to hang monuments, but the service is no longer provided.
The under decoration, under the cemeteries bylaw 2008-27, it talks about Schedule C, such as cut flowers, spiritual or religious objects or mementos. And then in the decoration under proposed, the religious objects have been removed. Is that the intent, or was it just not added in there? Because it does say, it doesn't say et cetera, but are religious objects still allowed in under decorations?
Ms. Brodin?
Mr. Morgan?
Through the chair, yes, they are.
Thank you for that. And in regards to the, let's see, the memorial maintenance, the new section, it's a new section, 21.1, it says memorials and memorialization are the personal property of the interment rights holders for the lot. The interment rights holder is responsible at all times for the condition of the memorial and the memorialization. The city is not obligated to report or repair any vandalism or damage caused by natural causes, third parties or unknown causes. Can I just ask why, if we're there and we're looking after this, why would we not want to report back to the families if there have been any types of vandalisms or repair needed? Through the chair.
Ms. Brodin?
Thank you. Mr. Morgan? Or Ms. Shaley?
From time to time, when we do get vandalism, and specifically towards the city of Regina on Broad Street, that the monuments that have been damaged have been there for an extended period of time. So we have reached out in the past to find those relatives, and it has, I'll say this, it's been very unsuccessful trying to track down, the owners or family members of those monuments. At the end of the day, the family has purchased those monuments. It's their property. But when it becomes difficult to track down, the cemetery ends up being responsible at some point because it's a liability in terms. So have we received vandalism in the Regina or Riverside Cemetery of that extent? Not to that extent, but where we do see the significant vandalism or damages in Regina, and those monuments are quite old, and the family is almost impossible to track down to see if they can repair it. So the city ends up repairing the grounds or removing some of the monuments if we had to.
So I just want to be clear in that response. So we actually do reach out to ensure to let them know that there has been vandalization. So some may want to, but there might be some others that have. I mean, if it was back in the 1900s, they may not have family members or whatever available and be able to be reached. Is that accurate? But we still do reach out Is that accurate?
We reach out by the last known contact of that individual that may have helped inter that person. We also put it in the media. We also make every effort to contact them through that way.
Perfect, thank you. In regards to just 1 second here, one last question. We are seeing now, and I'm just going to compare ours, or some of them, to, of course, the Regina Memorial Gardens as well. And when you go out there, there's actually a little pond. They have some little geese. They have, and we know that cremation is on the rise. Of course, it's in the report. And so are we providing and building more columbariums in that case? And when we look at the landscape of a cemetery, because I absolutely would agree that cemeteries are places where people, yes, go to in their final life, but it's also a time for families to go and sit and be. And we need to create space in that. And when I looked at other cemeteries, it is a place where people gather, families, memories. I agree with, there is history in all of this. We look at the names that have carried Regina through. So I'm wondering, how do we look at the landscape? Is it just keep field of headstones, and or do we actually look at trying to make it beautiful for the last stages as people die? Or do we, is it something that, does it always come down to a cost, and that's why there's no pond or anything like that there? Through the chair.
Ms. Broughton?
Thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Through the chair, yes, when planning out future expansion or utilizing space within the existing cemetery grounds, we want to ensure that we're providing a reflection area, because that's what it is. It's not just interments, it's also families reflecting. We design this columbariums within, the available space that we have. Going forward with the cemetery expansion, we know that there's more need, and we're looking forward into that in the next 5 to 7 years when we develop that next phase of the cemetery. So yes, we're always considering, we're also utilizing, we're planning around the trees, we're planning around the roads, we're planning around other monuments in that area so that there is some peacefulness, if you want to say, in that area.
Thank you. I would just ask that we actually take a tour out to the Regina Memorial Gardens as well, to look at the columbariums out there that have been built recently. Most of them are all full, but again, it's something that I think we need to look at, because it has changed how people, from the traditional casket to now moving into cremation. So that's all I have. And just one comment, if I can, I absolutely support the individual that did come forward, that we need to, of course, respect the cemeteries, but also I think there is history here. But I also see the city side where we need to ensure that these don't become dog parks, because I've had concerns from residents that cemeteries need to be respected, but it's not a place that you take your dog and let them run wild. So I think there's that balance there. So I support administration as well on ensuring that we've got the right people in the cemeteries. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Councillor LeBlanc, did you have further questions, or did you forget to lower your hand?
I do have further comments.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think two parts of our existing cemeteries bylaw address some of the concerns we've heard about today, and that's before the proposed amendment. So the first of those is 39 sub 1 says, don't enter the cemetery outside of visiting hours as posted on the gates. And the second of those is section 41 that says no person shall disturb the quiet or good order of a cemetery by noise or other improper conduct. I think those are totally reasonable restrictions, and what they do is allow city staff, in particular Section 41, some discretion in understanding sort of what's offside of how cemeteries should be used and what is onside. Given that, I have some concerns about the proposed Section 39 sub 4 of the bylaw that would ban any tour, event, or commercial activity, notably for the way it would interfere with activities like we've heard from Kenton, who came. But I think it's bad decision making, frankly, to be amending policies on the fly, or rather bylaws on the fly. So to try to avoid that outcome, what I'd like to seek from administration is an undertaking to, prior to the March 16, 2022 council meeting, to suggest alternate language to 39 sub 4 that might take account of some of the concerns raised by the delegation and councillors today. So I'd ask whether admin is willing to provide that undertaking.
Who would like to take that? Ms. Bryden?
Ms. Shaley? Through the chair, we'd be happy to come back with some alternate wording.
Thank you very much. I don't have any further questions or comments.
So we have no other questions. Just a further comment to Councillor Blanc. Yeah, I was shocked when I heard from the delegate, and I appreciate the fact that we're going to look into that and see if we could bring something back that is worded a little bit better. Correct? All right. Is that it? That's it, you guys. Councillor Stanishek, do you want to close debate?
I'll just say one more thing too, is I appreciate all the comments that people have made today, and the fact that cemeteries can be seen as park. I did want to mention that for the warehouse district, for anyone who works in that area, the cemetery on 4th and Broad is basically the only park that is kind of nearby, a place where they can go for a reflection. So I appreciate and I look forward to seeing changes to maybe the language and to see the new policy coming forward.
Thank you, Councillor Stanishek. Madam Clerk, would you like to call the vote? Madam Clerk?
Through you, Madam Clerk, the motion carries unanimously with all 10 members of council voting in favor. Councillor Mole is away from the meeting.
We need to start out, time is kind of getting away with us here. We're gonna have to move to table 3 reports. EX 22-22, EX 22-6, and EX 22-24. Can I have somebody move those reports? Councillor Bandura? Do I need a second? No, okay. So, we are gonna go on to.
Sorry, Councillor Shaw?
Yes.
Just a point of order. Can you repeat the ones that are being tabled, please?
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. EX 22-22, EX 2206, and EX 2224.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to now consider EX 22-23, lead program enhancement bylaw changes. Can I call on Mr. Onright to introduce the report, please?
Thank you. Through the chair. The report in front of committee details the changes to bylaw number 8942, the water bylaw. Needed to implement the enhancements to the lead service connection management program that were approved from lead service connection management program report CR 21-90 in May of 2021. Our priority is providing support to residents with lead service connections while continuing to provide education material, testing options, continuous filters to eligible residents until a full lead service connection replacement occurs. In 2021, the program support recommendations in CR 21-90 were approved by City Council to allow property owners to repay the city over a period of 5 or 10 years if eligible for the replacement of the private side of lead service connection that is a mandatory replacement when an adjoining city side lead service connection is replaced. The administration is recommending City Council approve the amendments to the water bylaw that allows property owners to utilize the city's deferred payment options in relation to the mandatory replacement of the private side of lead service connections when an adjoining city side lead service connection is replaced, and that it allows property owners to utilize the city's deferred payment options if the private side of a lead service connection is still lead, but the city side has been replaced and the property owner chooses to replace the private side. And then details of what happens when a property owner fails to make the required payments as laid out in the lead service connection replacement program. Administration is also recommending the council instruct the city solicitor to prepare an amendment to the water bylaw to be brought forward to the meeting of City Council following approval of the recommendations in this report by City Council. And joining me is Curtis Stoney, Director of Water, Waste and Environment, Janet Aird, Manager of Program Development and Delivery, and Lane Frolick, Coordinator of Program Delivery and Development.
Thank you, Mr. Onright. Can I have someone move this report with the amended motion to add the recommendation in accordance with the adjustment memo received from the interim city clerk? Councillor Hawkins? Do we have any questions regarding this report from any members? Councillor Stevens, go ahead.
First question is about Appendix C, the affordable access application. We're going to be using the template that we use for transit passes and the fun pass. Is it the exact same, or is this simply a model that we're going to be using?
Through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Doney to comment.
Through the chair, that form there is a model, and so we'll update that to include the lead service connection management program.
Okay, thank you. Some of this information requires a resident to reach out to a registered social worker, as well as other documentation to support their low-income status. Have you encountered any problems currently with anyone not being able to secure that information and therefore not being able to access the affordable passes?
Mr. Doney?
Through the chair, so for the lead service connection management program, we haven't experienced that yet because this is a new program. Regarding the overall program of the city, I can't speak to that. If we do encounter that, that's something definitely we would bring back to council. The objective is to make this as easy as possible for residents to ensure they can remove their lead service connection.
Okay, thank you. As a matter of an undertaking where appropriate, perhaps it would be useful, if you haven't done so already, to reach out to the Ministry of Social Services and therefore specific caseworkers to work with residents who fall under this category. I think it would be very important to make sure that they are provided with the information and the support that they're asking for. To Mr. Onright, yesterday we had a meeting with community members as well as public health officials and members of the Water Security Agency. Would you mind providing a brief overview of what was discussed and how it relates to this report, ensuring that we're dealing with the public health questions associated with lead service connections?
Thank you, through the chair. So yesterday there was a community group that met with not only administration, but we had WSA, the Water Security Agency. We also had SHA present in the meeting. So the concerns brought forward, a few of them that were brought forward from this community group related to the health side and a little bit around how we plan for the lead replacement connections. So some of the questions that were brought forward, how do we deal with higher lead concentrations in households as opposed to ones that have lower lead concentrations? So we had explained to the group that this is a coordinated effort with our construction program. We definitely don't want to turn a community upside down with our construction season, and this needs to be well planned out. We had great dialogue with the community group. We also talked about communication. As these lead connections are in homes that are built prior to 1960, for the most part, they are in more isolated in 3 communities: Cathedral, Heritage, and North Central. We talked about a communication plan. How do we get to the residents that maybe don't have access to social media through iPhones or devices that the general public may have access to? Our communication plan will work with the community associations, with community groups as such, to ensure that we are communicating with all residents in these neighborhoods to make sure that they have access to filter programs until the lead service connection piece on the private side and even on the city side can actually be finished off with the replacement of these pipes and connection points. We committed, administration committed to meet with this community group again in the future. And we also committed to work together moving forward. It was a great discussion. Certainly appreciated Councillor Stevens and Councillor LeBlanc being there to clarify a few points on the timelines of this program, which is moved from 30 years down to 15 years. I'm not sure, Mr. Doney, do you have anything to add?
Through the chair, I'll just add one thing: is what's before exec committee right now is the requirements to replace the private side lead when the public side is done, and that's really important to reduce lead at the tap, which is our objective.
Thank you. Balance of my questions were related to the update which we've tabled, so I'll save that for the next executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Stanicuk.
Thank you. Through the chair, the report does talk about the fact that when there's going to be a plan to do both the city side and the private side will be done at the same time. And I just want to clarify that at the same time means it's one dig, it's being replaced at the same time. It's not 2 different digs subsequent to the other.
Councillor Stanicuk, I'm trying to bring this back to the bylaw itself, and that's what we're talking about right now.
The report that is before us, is it -23? Yep. So in the report, it talks about, on page 5, it does talk about the replacement. And I just want clarification that it's one time and one replacement, not 2 subsequent replacements.
Through the chair, ideally, yes. That'll be a coordinated effort when the city is doing the city side replacement, coordinating the private side at the same time.
Okay. And through the chair, a second question regarding the fact, the report points out that we do not have information on private residences that may still have lead private side. Is there a plan to do any kind of communication with, because I know there's been communication with people where we do know there's a lead service connection, but has there been communication with all private homeowners with advice on how to check if their private side is lead or not?
Mr. Allwright?
Through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Doney to comment on that.
Through the chair, so as the report before you is reviewed and if approved, the lead service connection management program will be what I would call a stable program, and it'd be a good time this fall to be notifying all residents that may have a private or a public lead service connection. So we could look at, and we do plan to look at, sending out letters to all residents in certain areas that could have a private lead service connection. And it's a good time to do that this fall as the program becomes stabilized with the financing options that are before council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanchuk. Councillor Findera, I see your light on. Yes?
Yeah,
Okay,
thank
go
you.
ahead.
Councillor Stanchuk question triggered a question on the lead connection. Do we have the same trench that you have your water, that's let's say lead, then you got a sewer, and I think in the report talks of if you're replacing one, you have to replace both. Is that communication going through to the owner of the residence? If they have lead going all the way through, so I mean their sewer goes all the way through, how do we just repair ours, part of our sewer, but the resident is not? So the loaded question is there's one trench, two things in it. Do we do two things at once instead of, because you can't just do one?
Through the chair, so I think that will definitely be dependent on whether or not the sewer line needs to be replaced or not. Those discussions would happen at the time of the contact with the resident to let them know the city is replacing the city side of the connection, and if the sewer line needs to be replaced, that could be an opportunity to be able to do that work at the same time, because if a trench is being done. In some cases, a trench won't be dug, it'll be a lining that will be done, it'll be a trenchless operation.
Okay. Yeah, that was the question and the concern is that, I mean, we do have some areas no corrode sewer lines and then cast and all that, right? So, and if you do go into that trench digging, then you've got a potential. But if you're going to be doing other method of digging or not digging by relining, then okay, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Findera. Councillor LeBlanc, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, in terms of non-emergency, so a scheduled lead service connection replacement, how much advance notice will the resident get?
Mr. Allwright?
Through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Doney to comment.
Through the chair, so for planned lead service connection replacements, that will be integrated as part of a roadways contract. Residents will receive lots of notice. So typically construction letters would go out around this time of year for construction to occur in this construction season. In a other report that we're looking at, we're working towards making sure residents receive notice at least 10 days before the work is going to occur.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. That was easy. Okay, Madam Clerk, if there's no more questions, you call a vote. Oh, Councillor Hawkins, sorry. I always forget. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, the motion carries 9-0 with Councillor Mancinelli temporarily away from the meeting and Councillor Mole is not in attendance.
Thank you. We will now consider EX 22-25, advance notice of water shutoff update. Mr. Onright, can I ask you to introduce the report, please?
Thank you. Through the chair. Administration brings forward this report on the advance notice of water shutoff recommendations in response to the advance notice of water shutoff motion MN 21-12. This report details the citywide implementation plan of notifying affected residents of their water being turned off for planned maintenance and emergency work at least the night before. City of Regina coordinates up to 1,000 water repairs across the city each year while addressing emergency repairs as needed. City currently completes water repairs and upgrades using internal construction crews or contractors depending on the repair and the project. Water main breaks occur throughout the year and typically increasing during hot, dry summers and the coldest months from December to February. In a standard week, city construction crews complete 20 water system repairs and provide approximately 1,000 temporary water service outage door knockers to residents. On average, the city receives 2 to 3 service requests a week about the current notification process. Improvements to our water outage notification process is planned as outlined in the report. Advance notification letters advising of water outages and road restrictions will be delivered to households where planned maintenance work is scheduled within the next 10 days. Letters will be delivered at least the evening before the anticipated work and a door knocker the morning of the repair. This will allow time for residents to draw enough potable water for use in advance of the water being shut off. Water outages and service updates for planned maintenance will be available on regina.ca/water outage. To provide residents with up-to-date information about temporary water outages in their area. The webpage also includes steps residents can take both to prepare for the water outage and after the water supply is resumed. In addition, the city is moving forward with the implementation of the automated meter infrastructure project, which will include a customer software application. It is expected this software application will allow residents to sign up for electronic notification of any expected water outages. Administration is currently working through the procurement process of the project, and it is expected that electronic notifications for water outages will be available in 2023. For the report, there was a municipal scan done of Saskatoon, Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg. In the report, you will see administration is reallocating a resource, so there's no budget implications to doing this. This resource will be dedicated to this change in process for notifications. With that, I'll hand it back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Onright. Can you just repeat, you said the notifications will be probably up and ready by 2023, is that when you said?
Through the chair. That is for the electronic notifications, and that's the current AMI project that is moving forward. So that will allow for electronic notifications. The process change is dealing with 2022. So what I've just spoke about, we would like to put into place for the upcoming construction season.
Okay, yeah, I just, thank you. The electronic notifications are awesome. Can I have somebody move the report? Councillor Stanachek, thank you. Any questions from any members on this report? Yeah, Councillor Brasciani, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. So we say that we get 3 SRs approximately a week, which I know I've heard from many in my area as well. So I want to ask the question: we deem it satisfactory that when we have a planned maintenance, so we know well in advance that we are planning maintenance in the area. Can I just, get some reasoning why we didn't move it, so we can give at least residents, when it's planned, at least 1 to 2 weeks notice with a letter? If someone could just respond as to why we're still going to just do it the night before. It says to advise residents the night before it'll be turned off, at least the evening before. And then and this is with the plan, and then a door knocker the next morning. So if I can just get a response, please.
Through the chair, so what I talked about is planned maintenance. They will receive notification 10 days in advance. They will then receive notification the night before, and they will then also receive notification the morning of the water being shut off. I'll ask Mr. Doney to add comment.
Through the chair. So yes, improvements need to be made as we've discussed here, and what we're planning to move forward with is to ensure that residents have a letter before the construction occurs. At the minimum, it would be the night before, but the expectation or the plan is that it will be closer to the 10 days before the work is going to occur. We were really just trying to ensure that we met the intent of the motion, which was to ensure residents are notified at least the night before. But the intent is that it'll be closer to the 10 days before.
Thank you. So could we have it written in the policy that it is 10 days within that, 1 to 10 days rather than just 1 day? Because I just know with policy sometimes that, it depends on who's there and who's interpreting it. Can that be changed that way?
Mr. Albright?
Through the chair, yes, we can put 1 to 10 days. It depends on the circumstance as to how much notification we're able to provide.
Yeah, I think, sorry, go ahead.
We can definitely put that in our process. I'm getting a nod from Mr. Doney. That can be done.
Thank you. One of the things that I think is vitally important is that when we start to plan, and I understand that there's always unforeseen circumstances or would fall in that emergency work, right, would be the day before, things like that. But I think if we can give the notice at least that there is a letter that does go out, and of course the door knocker, which I think is really important as well. So thank you for that. The other one I just wanted to know is with our emergency work. We have in there that they're getting notice the morning of, which I understand sometimes emergency that happens. But I looked at Edmonton, and they also have a dispatch team to help make phone calls to notify customers. Because sometimes what happens is that notification goes on the door, and people have either gone to work or they're still sleeping and don't even know that there's a door knocker on there, so they have to save the water. So I guess my question is, if there was something where that we could dispatch, phone calls to like that street to kind of work together, because I think it would be more personal. Is that something that could be considered?
Through the chair, I'm going to ask Mr. Doney to comment. I would trust that in many cases we would not have contact information for the resident in terms of phone numbers.
Through the chair, as we roll out the customer software in 2023 and we encourage residents to sign up, I think that'll be a really good opportunity that residents can receive that information on their phone or through email, and that way if they're either not awake or if they're not at home, they still have that notification that will come to them.
Thank you. one of the things that I've heard is that we have many seniors as well, people who are not on, that are not signed up for these notifications, that maybe don't have cell phones, that kind of a thing. Again, when I followed one of the things I think the most frustrating is from residents is to all of a sudden see a notice on their door and they haven't collected the water. And I remember, I think I gave an example where a lady, I had to take water to her, and she was in the downtown area. And I think, so there is a little bit of it's one thing to say we're going to just, if they sign up, that's great. But that morning when they just, it's an urgent, now if it's an urgent and emergent, I guess you're saying, do we have phone numbers or don't we have phone numbers for people on streets? Like, do we have access to any of that or not?
Mr. Onright?
No, randomly we would not. I'll also mention through our construction PSAs that we send out each day notifying residents or notifying of street closures, we plan on adding our water notification list. So in a neighborhood, if we have a block that had a water main break, notification of the specific location on those PSAs. So that's another way for residents to be able to get the information. Through the construction season each morning, the media outlets will talk about where road closures are, where there's heavy construction, and we plan on adding this portion to it.
Okay. I'll leave that. I won't push the emergent one. I think that if in emergency, I think we have to adjust. Everyone has to give a little bit. I appreciate the notice for the planned maintenance work, but I guess the other piece is that as long as we collect the data and hear from people, because if it's not working for even the emergent one where, it's still, do we have to look at something differently? I would appreciate, we'll be collecting the data. How do we collect the data on that anyway?
Mr. Onright?
Through the chair, a lot of our information will come back through service requests. I'll ask Mr. Doney if we receive it through any other form.
Through the chair, yes, our primary source of data will be service requests, and of course, we're always looking to get feedback on any process that we have in place.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bisciani. Councillor Stevens, go ahead, please.
Thank you, through the chair. If it wasn't for the text messages, I don't think I'd ever remember to take out my garbage. I've become so dependent upon those notifications, and they work so well, along with the notification for the snow routes. So I expect a growing demand for electronic notification for all sorts of infrastructure projects. So when we're sourcing the software, will it allow us to connect different needs to that electronic system? So is this just for this particular concern, water shutoff, or can we use that software for other notification systems like road repairs, et cetera?
No.
Mr. Onright?
Through the chair, I'm going to ask Ms. Bryden to comment.
Thank you, through the chair. So right now there's a few different pieces of work occurring corporately, and the customer management system is a piece of that, and also our other larger project with the AMI software. And so as we work through these pieces and scope those types of work, we'll have better indication of which pieces of software we can use for those notifications.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Fundera, go ahead, please.
Through Madam Chair, we have ability to provide potable water on the block, for instance, like a tank or a water tank, whatever. So if we miss someone, I know wintertime is probably, if it's -40, that might be a little bit difficult, but we do have that. Don't we do that? Is that a common practice or is that a standard practice? Madam Chair, to you.
Through the chair, I wouldn't say it's a standard practice. we do it if need be. So in emergent situations, we do have a potable water tank that we can provide water to.
So just what triggered is the Council Gratian answered the senior maybe, or someone didn't get a chance. I mean, I don't know if we do that. Would they call Service Regina to help them out, or because they can't go to their neighbor, right? If it's a whole block, or is it? How does that work? Thanks.
Through the chair, I'm going to ask Mr. Doney to provide comment.
Through the chair. So typically, most of our water outages would occur, in that 4 to 6 hour period. The intent is to get in and get out as quickly as possible. If water is going to be off longer than 24 hours, we definitely move towards bringing a tanker out on the street to ensure people have access to water. If there's a situation where a resident needs water, they can always talk to the crew lead and a conversation can happen. And we would work towards providing some kind of water on site, but it wouldn't be a standard practice where we'd bring water to residents.
Good. That's good. Thank you.
How about residents just call their city councilor? Any other questions? I just have one question, just because it came up with me in my ward. I got an email saying that something was going to be done. Then the next day I got an email saying that it wasn't going to be done. What do we do in incidences like that with the homeowners? I know I get the email, but what happens with people? Mr. Onright?
Through the chair, I'll ask Mr. Doney to comment.
Through the chair, and that's why in the report we talk about the night before to 10 days, because emergency breaks take priority. So if something occurs in the last 12 hours where staff have to be redirected to protect homes, or if someone is out of water, then day by days can change. So once we move towards the electronic notification, that information would be provided to residents. Currently, we would provide that through a means of a letter or a door knocker if something is changing from our original plans.
Thank you. Is that it? Oh, Councillor Stanichuk, would you like to? No, you're good. Okay, clerk, Madam Clerk, can I ask you to call the vote?
Through you, Madam Chair, the motion carries 9-0, with all members of council voting in favor, with the exception of Councillor Mancinelli, as he is temporarily away from the meeting, and Councillor Moll is absent from the meeting.
Thank you. Can I have someone move a motion to for private resolution or private session? Sorry. Councillor Stevens. I will call the question. Anyone opposed? Carried.